Section 1 of The Drama, a quarterly review. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by BellonaTimes. Arthur Schnitzler, from The Drama, a quarterly review, August 1912. Section 1. When an American author regularly produces one novel or play a year, and in some years two, we do not think of inquiring to what profession he belongs. One learns, therefore, with a start of surprise, that Arthur Schnitzler, from whose pen no less than 23 volumes have appeared in print since 1892, who has reclaimed the one-act play as a serious literary form, who is called Austria's leading dramatist after Schönherr, and to whom was awarded the Grillparzer Prize in 1908, is a practicing physician. One feels an irresistible desire to ask him, "When do you write your books?" or "When do you see your patients?" Born in Vienna in 1862, the son of a professor in the medical faculty, he took his M.D. at the University of Vienna in 1885. Was thereafter employed as assistant physician at the General Hospital until 1888, and has since then been connected with the clinical hospital, in addition to his activities as practitioner. The physician often sees life in its sombrest aspect, for he learns to know men largely through their diseases. He encounters more frequently than upon the soldier shoots him down in cold blood. A conflict of a different sort appears in Der Einsame Weg, The Lonely Board. Here Schnitzler appears to have taken a leaf out of Anzengruber's book, for he treats a problem exactly parallel to that of the latter's novel, Der Schandfleck, The Blot of Shame. In both, a man brings up as his own the child of his wife by another man, only Anzengruber's hero knows it. In both cases the real father reveals the truth to the child, seeking comfort for a lonely old age. Only Anzengruber's heroine has already learned the truth from her foster father. In both, the child turns to the only father it has ever known, leaving the real father to go his lonely road. At this point may also be mentioned a series of 4 one-act plays which illustrate in different ways a more spiritual conflict, that between the practical and the artistic view of life. It is shown most clearly in the first play of the series, entitled Lebendige Stunden, Living Hours. This is a dialogue between an affectionate son and a devoted friend of his mother. Her death has crushed the older man, but has freed the young poet for new creative work. In wild jealousy and resentment, the former reveals the mother's secret, namely, that she ended her own life of incurable suffering in order that her son might be set free by it. Overwhelmed at first, he later rises to new creative power, accepting the mother's sacrifice. In the second piece of the group, the conflict is not brought out so clearly. Die Frau mit dem Dolch, The Woman with the Dagger, is the title of a picture in which a painter's wife recognizes a previous incarnation of herself. Irresistibly, she is led to repeat the same course as that taken by the pictured woman. This leads first to the betrayal of her husband, and finally to her lover's death by her own hand. Her deed inspires her husband to a new work of the highest art. High above the rest of the series and rated as only inferior to Der Grein Kakadu is Der letzten Masken, The Final Mask. The two viewpoints are here represented by two quondam friends, both poets, one of whom is famous and rich, the other poor and sick and waiting for death in a hospital. The poor but great-souled journalist calls his really shallow colleague to his death-bed in order to pour out the vials of his wrath upon him. But when the petty, great man comes, he feels the uselessness of attempting to open his eyes, and turns over to die contentedly in the consciousness of his own greater worth. Literature, the last of the series, is a farce, but a brilliant one. A priori, one would not expect Schnitzler to achieve success in the historical drama. Yet he has twice tried his hand at it. In Der Junge Medardus he takes us back to the Napoleonic Wars. Medardus sets out to assassinate the emperor, but instead turns his dagger upon the woman who urges him on to the deed, because she has been accused of being Napoleon's mistress. The author's dialogue is his undoing in this work. He is so concerned to produce atmosphere and setting that the dramatic action vanishes from view. His most ambitious drama so far, though not his most successful, is the other historical play, Der Schleier de Beatrice, Beatrice's Veil. In it he attempts a canvas of more than Shakespearean proportions. No less than 53 speaking parts are listed, besides all the mute figures which fill the background at various times. The scene is laid in Bologna of the 16th century. In the central figure, next to the Beatrice of the title, is the reigning duke, Leonardo Bentivoglio. And this again reminds of Shakespeare. If we add the great length of the drama, 5 acts, covering 215 pages, and the alternation of blank verse and prose, with an occasional happy turn of speech, we have all the elements that justify a comparison with Shakespearean art. Certainly, any deeper similarity is lacking. The great canvas merely confuses. The verse, while smooth and even elegant at times, shows no sign of greatness, and the length deadens the effect and breaks up the unity of the conception. Worse than all, the magnificent reality and life of Shakespeare's characters is wholly lacking. The personages of this play are not convincing. They are not alive. The action centers around Beatrice, the wonderfully beautiful 16-year-old daughter of a petty merchant. She is loved by Filippo Losci, a brave nobleman and celebrated poet. For her sake he forsakes his betrothed, Teresina, sister of Count Andrea Santucci, and for her he is ready to forsake honor and his native city as well. But Beatrice has daydreamed that she was the consort of the handsome and valiant duke, and therefore Filippo thrusts her from him. She goes and is ready to yield to the wish of her brother that she marry a young man of her own station. On the way to the church they are met by the duke, who loves her and confesses his love. She does not say no, but demands that he make her his wife. He at once makes preparations for the ceremony and opens up his own gardens for a bacchanalian festival. The city has been invested by the enemy. Death may come to all on the morrow. It behooves them to make the most of the fleeting moments ere they pass. Beatrice steals away from the tumult of the festival to go to Filippo, whom she really loves. He proposes to her that they drink death together after their night of love. She professes willingness, but when he puts her to the test by pretending that she has already drunk poison with him, her dread of death reveals itself, and Filippo drinks the real poison alone. Overcome with horror, she hastens back to the duke, forgetting, however, her veil. She endeavors to cover up what she has done with lies, but is in the end induced by fear of death to lead the duke to Filippo's house. He understands and forgives, saying, "Wast thou not, Beatrice, a simple child, that played with crown and throne, because they glittered, and with a poet's soul because mysterious, and with a stripling's heart, because, forsooth, 'twas given thee, but we are too severe and suffer not." And each of us demanded not only that he be the only plaything, more the world and all to thee, and thee we chide, a traitress, wicked, and thou wast a child. These words would seem to hold the key to the involved happenings of the play, but they do not explain away the unreality of the actors. The fundamental idea of the drama, on the other hand, seems to be the sardonically emphasized juxtaposition of love and death. Since death threatens on the morrow, let us enjoy our love. This feature, in varying expressions, recurs again and again. One of its manifestations is Beatrice's own horror of death, which she herself admits at the last, and in so doing attempts to justify her strange conduct. The Duke has said to her mother, "Thou hast thy daughter now, and she is free, and Beatrice, do thou lay fear aside." She replies, kneeling by Filippo's corpse, "All that is past, and yet 'twas that alone that urged me on through all these devious paths from lie to lie, from shame to shame. And all because I shuddered at the thought of lying in death as thou now liest. And why must I, just I, be singled out to bring something sorrow to so many, knowing I meant to wrong no one?" I now come to that type of subject which is evidently Schnitzler's favorite, and in which he has scored his greatest successes and his greatest failures. Whether he merely follows one marked trend of the naturalistic school, or a strong individual bent, it is certain that his work is characterized by a steady, almost morbid insistence upon man's sexual life. It crops out again and again, and amounts at times to a veritable obsession. No one will deny that the sexual impulse is one of the most powerful natural forces in the world. But to make sexual intercourse the equivalent of life itself, as Schnitzler does in Der Ruf des Lebens, The Call of Life, can only be called an outrageous distortion of normal humanity. The central figures of this drama are two young girls of humble station. One, foreseeing early death by consumption, flings herself open-eyed into the gutter. The other rushes over her father's murdered body, past the fresh corpse of a faithless wife, into the arms of the latter's paramour, and both, we are given to understand, are following simply the call of life. Something of this unnatural emphasis on the sexual life is to be found in Anatole, his first publication. This strange book consists of a series of 7 one-act pieces, each of which centers about an affair between the young man of this name and a different woman. Now it is a girl from the ballet, now a bareback rider from the circus, now a weak married woman. Once he is about to marry a self-confessed harlot, but leaves her after all. In the final piece he is seen on his wedding morning, and his friend Max is compelled to assist him in getting rid of the imperious beauty who has spent the night with him. Noteworthy is Die Frage an das Schicksal, questioning fate, in which Anatole hypnotizes the girl in order to ask her if she has been true to him, and fails to put the question in the end. Noteworthy also is the little dialogue Weihnachtskopf, Christmas presents, which reminds one of Hope's Dolly Dialogues, although it is far less clever. Here Anatole encounters a married woman, whom he has loved before she married, and who, it appears, was not wholly indifferent to him. She sends flowers by him to his present inamorata. Essentially sexual problems are also involved in Zwischenspiel, Intermezzo. The plot consists of the separation, reunion, and second separation of a married couple, the wife being the prime mover in each case, and the motive force a thirst for adventures, i.e., love affairs. The characters are not alive, and the work has passed almost unnoticed. Just the contrary is true of his Beggen, which attracted so much attention that its publication was forbidden. This is again a series of swift dialogues, in which the slender thread of connection leads us back to the point from which we started. In this field lies Schnitzler's highest dramatic achievements thus far. It is his Liebele, Light o' Love, of which Das Vermächtnis, The Legacy, is a rather feeble echo. The legacy is the posthumous, illegitimate child of a young aristocratic rake. When the child dies, the mother is cast out of his family. In Light o' Love, the action is more firmly knit, and the result is a superb achievement of its kind. The story of the play is as follows. Fritz Loheimer, a young and wealthy student, has been drawn into an intrigue with a beautiful young married woman. The liaison puts a heavy drain on his nerves, for she fears that they are watched, and her fears are communicated to him. His friend and fellow student, Theodor Kaiser, worried by his run-down condition, attempts to cure him of the one passion by leading him into one of a different kind. On one occasion Theodore induces Tony Schlager, a young milliner's assistant, for whom he has a momentary infatuation, to bring her prettiest acquaintance to the meeting, while he himself brings Fritz. Although Fritz is not sufficiently touched to break off the first affair, he does feel the charm of the young girl, and his meetings with her help to soothe his ragged nerves. Theodore invites the two girls to his friend's apartments, hoping in this way to help him over one of his bad hours. While they are in the midst of their merriment, the bell rings, and Fritz finds his worst fears realized. The intrigue is discovered, and he sees clearly that he must fall in the ensuing duel. From this point the interest centers in Christine, the light o' love. The daughter of a poor man, she has lived quietly in her modest little home, working for her father, and knowing few pleasures, if also few sorrows. To her who has never come in contact with men, Fritz is like a being from another world, and the whole power of her fresh womanhood is thrown into the love she gives him. He is for her, as she puts it, her God and her bliss of heaven, and while she harbors no illusions as to the permanence of Fritz's love for her, she has never been able to contemplate losing him. The second act is devoted chiefly to a careful development of her character and her attitude toward Fritz. And, on the other hand, an added touch of pathos results from the fact that for the first time Fritz begins to realize, dimly, it is true, that she is and what she might be to him. This nature is kindled by the pure fire of her spirit, and when he bids her farewell, leaving her, as he knows, forever, it is with the pang of one who may look into the open gate of heaven, but may not enter in. The third act, 2 days after the duel, centers about Christine's discovery of the whole truth about Fritz. Pain at his heart is swallowed up in the greater grief caused by the manner of it. She is beside herself at the thought that he never loved her, that she was merely a pastime to him, that he could leave her with a smile to go and be shot down for another woman. But when she learns that he has already been buried, and that she cannot even see his face once more, her anguish passes all bounds, and she rushes forth to seek his grave and die upon it. The synopsis shows the firm, clear-cut lines of the play, its steady and well-planned development, its fine climax. But it has the further merit, which cannot be allowed, all of Schnitzler's dramas, that the characters are really alive and convincing. Not merely the main figures live, but also Christine's old father, her prying but kindly neighbor Catherine. Yes, and even the wronged husband, who appears but once and is ominously styled simply the gentleman. And the character drawing is executed with the lightest possible touch, built up line by line out of seemingly flimsy dialogue, but with masterly precision. One of Schnitzler's earliest works, Lieblich, remains his high-water mark in the drama, and in view of the distinct limitations of his art, it may be doubted whether he will ever rise above it, or even reach it again. Certainly nothing he has done since has justified the hope it raised, that in Arthur Schnitzler might be found a new and powerful prophet of the naturalistic school. End of Section 1. Section 2. The first act, from Intermezzo by Arthur Schnitzler, Drama Quarterly compilation. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. The first act. The study of Amadeus. The walls are painted in dark gray with a very simple frieze. A door in the background leads to a veranda. On either side of this door is a window. Through the door one sees the garden, to which three steps lead down from the veranda. A cabinet stands between the door and the window at the right. A music stand holds a corresponding position to the left of the door. Antique bas reliefs are hung above the cabinet as well as the stand. The main entrance is on the right side, in the foreground. Farther back at the right is a door, leading to Cecilia's room. A door finished like the rest of the wall leads to the room of Amadeus at the left. A tall bookcase with a bust of Verrocchio on top of it stands against the right wall. In the corner back of it are several columns with tall vases full of flowers. A fireplace occupies the foreground at the left. Above it is a large mirror. On the mantel shelf stands a French clock of simple design. A table surrounded by chairs is placed in front of the fireplace. Farther back along the same wall are shelves piled with sheet music, and above them engravings of Schumann, Brahms, Mozart, and other composers. A bust of Beethoven occupies the farthermost corner at the left. Halfway down the stage, nearer the left wall, stands a piano with a piano stool in front of it. An armchair has been moved up close to the piano on the side toward the public. A writing desk holds a similar position at the right. Back of it are an easy chair and a couch, the latter having been moved close to the table. Amadeus, 30 years old, slender, with dark smooth hair. His movements are quick, with a suggestion of restlessness. He wears a gray business suit of elegant cut, but not well cared for. He has a trick of taking hold of the lapel of his sack coat with his left hand and turning it back. He is seated at the piano, accompanying Frederic. Frederic, 28, is dressed in a bright gray tailor-made suit and a red satin waist. Wears a broad-brimmed straw hat, very fashionable. Her hair is blonde, of a reddish tint. Her whole appearance is very dainty. She is singing an aria from the opera Mignon. Ha ha ha! Is it true? Really true? While singing, she is all the time making a motion as if she were beating the dust out of her riding suit with a crop. Amadeus, accompanying himself as he gives her the cue. Yes, you may laugh. I am a fool to ruin my horse. Frederic. Maybe you would like. Oh, wait. You don't know yet why I have ruined my horse. To ruin my horse for a quicker sight of you. Frederic, with the same gesture as before. Maybe you would like me to weep. Oh, I regret already that I came. Well, why? G sharp. Well, why don't you go back? Soon enough I shall see you again. You should say that ironically, not tenderly. Soon enough I shall see you again. Soon enough I shall see you again. Not angrily, Countess, but ironically. Call me Frederic and not Countess when you are working with me. Now that's the tone Philine should use. Hold on to it. And that's the right look, too. If you could do that on the stage, you might almost be an artist. Oh, mercy, I have sung Philine more than 20 times already. But not here. Countess. And not when Mrs. Adams Ortenburg was singing the part of Mignon. He leans forward so that he can look out into the garden. No, she isn't coming yet. With a smile. Perhaps the rehearsal isn't over. Amadeus, rising. Perhaps not. Is it true that Mrs. Adams Ortenburg has been requested to sing in Berlin next fall? Nothing has been settled yet. He goes to the window at the right. If you'll permit. Opens the window. What a splendid day! And how fragrant the roses are! It is almost like. Almost like Intermezzo. Yes, I know. How can you, as you have never been there? But you have told me enough about it. A villa standing at the edge of the water, radiantly white, with marble steps leading straight down to the blue sea. Yes, And sometimes on very hot nights I sleep in the park, right on the sward, under a plane tree. That plane tree is famous. But time is flying. It would be better to go on with the singing. He seats himself at the piano again. The Polonaise, if you please, Countess. He begins the accompaniment. End of section 2. Leonid Andreyev by Thomas Seltzer. From The Drama, A Quarterly Review of Dramatic Literature. Number 13, February 1914. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. Leonid Andreyev by Thomas Seltzer. The rise of Andreev was unusually rapid even in an age of such precipitate changes as characterized the Russian Revolution. Scarcely more than 10 years ago, Gorky addressed the following question to the Moscow Courier: Who conceals his identity behind the pseudonym of Leonid Andreyev? The reply was, Leonid Andreyev. In 1898, the Courier published his first story, Bragmont and Garaska. In January 1902, The Abyss appeared, and in the August of the same year, In the Fog. These two stories forthwith carried Andreyev's fame from one end of Russia to the other. Their instantaneous and sensational success won for the hitherto unknown author almost as much attention and adoration as Gorky himself was then receiving when at the high-water mark of his popularity as literary hero. The decade since the publication of The Abyss has been marked by important and far-reaching events for Russia. It was in that period that the Russian government suffered defeat at the hands of Japan, and that the Russian people suffered defeat at the hands of their government. After the glowing hopes of victory in the struggle for political freedom and social betterment, after an actual momentary taste of that freedom, the forces of reaction triumphed, and the best elements of Russian society sank into profound apathy. Many of these who had given themselves up completely to the fight for emancipation, who had sacrificed their careers, homes, and all, who, in fact, had entirely effaced their personal selves in that generous enthusiasm and devotion to a cause which is peculiar to the Russian, now, in the bitter reaction of disappointment, converted their zeal for the common good into self-indulgence and extreme individualism. At present there are signs indicating that the Russians are recovering from their lethargic and morbid state. Their natural idealism seems to be returning, and it looks as if they were getting ready to start a new fight for the liberation of their country. But the years of post-revolutionary reaction have cut their marks deep into the life of the people, and not least felt was the effect produced upon the literature of the period. For in no country is literature so much a part of life as it is in Russia. In no country does it so faithfully reflect the ideas and the spiritual and material conditions of the people. Nowhere is literature taken so seriously, and nowhere, therefore, does it wield so great an influence. Hence the fitful changes that Russian society has undergone in recent years. The confused and chaotic condition of its ideas and ideals are truthfully mirrored in its literature. The bold, defiant note of revolt, the confident trust in the future which Gorky has introduced, and which was the chief characteristic of the literature of the last decade of the 19th century, no longer suited the mood of the vanquished revolutionists. Gorky ceased to be a hero. New and strange gods arose whom the Russian intelligentsia fervently worshipped, each in turn. Artzybashev with his novel Senin, which, with its glorification of the sexual appetite, as generally interpreted, swept the young Russian generation like a holocaust. Merezovsky and his school with their reactionary religious mysticism in the name of culture. Valery Bryusov, a wondrously artistic nature, who, when not contemplating the cheerful prospect of the destruction of the universe, takes flight from the misery of this world to a world of his own creating, a sort of realistic romantic world of marvelous beauty. And Fedor Sologub, another poet of great merit, who sees in death the only good in life. There are whole groups of other writers representing every current in European literature, from that of the most rigid idealism down to the extremest decadence. With all this chase after new literary heroes, through all these frequent changes in literary fashions, Andreyev has maintained his position as Russia's leading story writer and dramatist. And just as Gorky's name might stand for the epoch in Russian literature covering the last decade of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, so Andreyev's gives its character to the literature of the subsequent period down to the present time. As yet there is no evidence of a decline in his popularity, though it was predicted years ago even by competent and favorable critics. He has himself told the story of his life in a brief sketch of which the following is a translation. I was born in 1871 in Orel and studied in the gymnasium there. I was a poor pupil, and in the seventh form was always at the bottom of my class. For conduct I got only 4, and sometimes as low as 3. The pleasantest times that I passed when in the gymnasium, I recall them with satisfaction to this very day, were the intervals between the hours, the so-called shifts, and also those rare occasions when I was sent out of the classroom. In the long empty corridor there was a sonorous silence playing with the monotonous sound of footsteps. On both sides were doors closing off the classrooms, full of people. A ray of sunlight, a free ray, would burst through a crack and play with the dust raised during one of the shifts and not yet settled. All this was mysterious, interesting, and full of a peculiar, hidden significance. When I was still in the gymnasium, my father, a surveyor, died and left me in poverty. At the university I suffered extreme want. The first year in St. Petersburg I even went hungry, but not so much from real need as from youth, inexperience, and ignorance of how to utilize superfluous pieces of clothes. Even now I am ashamed to think that I could go hungry for 2 days while I had 2 or 3 pairs of trousers, 2 overcoats, a winter and spring overcoat, and the like. I finished my course of study at the Moscow University. Here I was materially better off. The comrades and the committee helped me. But in other respects I have retained a pleasant recollection of the St. Petersburg University. The student body there is more differentiated, and among more sharply defined and distinct groups it is easier to find suitable companionship. In January 1904 I tried to shoot myself, but failed. The consequence of my unsuccessful attempt was penance in church imposed on me by the authorities, and heart disease, not dangerous but obdurate and troublesome. At that time I made 1 or 2 unsuccessful attempts to write, and I met with some success in painting, from which I derived a great deal of pleasure. I have loved painting ever since I was a child. I painted portraits to order at $1.50 and $2.50 apiece. When I grew proficient I received $5 and even as high as $6 a portrait. In 1897 I received my diploma and became a lawyer's assistant, but I got off the track from the very start. I was asked to report court cases for the Courier, a newspaper just then beginning publication in Moscow. I had no time to work up a law practice. All in all I had 1 civil case which I lost at every point, and a few criminal cases which I defended without pay. In 1898, at the request of the editor of the Courier, E.D. Novik, I wrote my first story, an Easter story, and since then I have given myself up entirely to writing. It has been of a varied enough character. I used to report cases in court and write bulletins under different pen names. Now I devote myself exclusively to Hell's letters. It is rarely that I write articles of a general nature. Maxim Gorky helped me a great deal with his advice and instruction, which I have always found excellent." As a matter of fact, the youthful Andreyev tried suicide not once but 3 times. He had another narrow escape from death in 1907. This time the attempt on his life was made by 2 assassins. Andreyev's persistent hold upon the people has often been made a reproach to him. Without the willingness to follow the changing literary fashions, he could not, it is said, have preserved his popularity undiminished. There is no doubt that the range of his interests is extraordinarily wide, and the themes of his numerous works correspondingly varied. He responds with peculiar sensitiveness to all the momentary ideas, moods, and emotions by which educated Russia is affected. In 1904 a war breaks out between Russia and Japan, and Andreyev writes his Red Laugh, a ghastly delineation of the horrors of war. The revolution finds its echo in most of the writings of 1905, particularly in his first drama, To the Stars. Then, when the government succeeds in crushing the people with its Black Hundreds, he gives us Saba, 1906, a drama in which the anarchist hero seeks to annihilate everything, to lay the earth bare, for the world is so bad that no rehabilitation is possible before the old is entirely cast out of the way. King Hunger, written in 1907, describes the uprising and the defeat of the hungry workers and the underworld. In Anathema, 1909, he turns to the mystical and religious trend that suddenly manifested itself among some of the Russian intellectuals. And his latest works, such as the dramas Professor Storitsyn and Yekaterina Ivanova, in which the personal interest of the characters constitutes the leading feature, while the larger problems are either altogether wanting or occupy a secondary position, are but so many proofs that the Russians have grown temporarily weary of the contemplation of the big cosmic problems, and are willing to stay a while on earth with nothing but human beings for their company. These are but a few of the questions dealt with in Andreyev's writings. In fact, his works are a faithful transcript of the ideologic history of his day. They voice young Russia's despair, doubts, and tribulations, occasionally, perhaps, its ideals and aspirations also. But to make this a reproach against Andreyev is indeed reversing ordinary values, and making what is, in his estimation, an author's highest merit. Nothing is so easy as the charge of catering to the changing public taste. As a matter of fact, Andreyev is a true child of his age. The problems of his age are also his own individual problems. He not only records them, but he feels them in himself, often divines them when they are but vaguely shadowed forth in the public consciousness, and gives them form and substance. That he touches the mainsprings of the Russian life of today, appealingly interprets modern Russian society, and stirs it in its vital parts, is shown by the remarkably spontaneous response that all his most important works have called forth. The impression they create is without a parallel in the literature of any other country. George Bernard Shaw is not so much a sensation in England as is Andreyev in Russia. The publication of each important story of drama of his has in succession proved an event, the storm center around which raged fierce oral and written debates. The Russian magazines open their pages to voluminous expository and polemic treatises of the significance or insignificance of the last word spoken by Andreyev. Strangely enough, the author, who has been accused of constantly turning from one subject to another in order to satisfy the demand of the fickle public, is also described as a writer obsessed with one idea. It is true that all his resourcefulness, with all his variety of matter and method, there is one note running through almost all of his works. In many, this one note grows so loud as to drown all the other sounds. Like a Wagnerian motif, it is iterated and reiterated until it seizes hold of you and never lets you go. This theme is death. Tolstoy said of Andreyev, "He wants to frighten me, but I am not frightened." The truth is, he does not want to frighten. He is himself frightened, and because he is frightened, with good reason, and because this reason applies equally well to you and me, his dread is easily communicated to every mortal who has not attained the superhuman serenity of Tolstoy when he made that remark. A humorous writer in life called Andreev Grandma's death, and Aedko, a Russian critic, seriously says of him, "In all the range of our literature, past as well as present, he is the gloomiest of Russian authors." Considering the tragic character of Russian literature in general, and considering further that the heart-wringing, terror-raising Dostoevsky is one of its main representatives, Andreyev then holds a record. He devoted two of his best stories, Lazarus and The Seven Who Were Hanged, entirely to this theme of death. Lazarus is written in Andreyev's usual impressionistic style and is full of symbolism. When Lazarus rises from the grave after having lain dead for 3 days, he becomes the very embodiment of death. Whosoever meets his gaze feels its "destructive force." But for Andreyev, the terror of death lies not merely in its being the cessation of life. Still more horrible is its incomprehensibility, its riddlesomeness, the impenetrable darkness stretching beyond it. None who met Lazarus' gaze were ever able to explain the terror dwelling immobile in the depths of his dark pupils, neither those who were forever broken by it, nor those who found in the original springs of life, which are as mysterious as death, the will to resist its power. Lazarus looked at a person calmly and simply, with no desire to conceal, yet with no desire to say anything. His look was cold, as of one infinitely indifferent to the living. The sun did not cease to shine when he looked, the fountain did not cease to play, and the native sky remained as pure and blue and cloudless as ever. Yet the man upon whom his enigmatic gaze fell no longer felt the sun, no longer heard the playing of the fountain, no longer recognized his native sky. Some wept bitterly, others tore the hair from their heads and senselessly cried for help. But to most it happened that they began to die quietly and listlessly, and kept dying for many a long year, dying before the eyes of all, withering and fading and gloomy, like a tree silently drying up in stony soil. And the first, those who cried and acted as if they were insane, sometimes returned to life, but the others never. Wisdom is powerless against Lazarus' fatal look. "I know everything, Lazarus," says the proud sage. "What fearful things can you tell me? How will you terrorize me?" A short time passed, and already the sage began to feel that the knowledge of the terrible is not the terrible itself, that the sight of death is not death itself, and he began to feel that wisdom and foolishness are alike before the infinite, for the infinite knows them not. And the boundary line between the seen and the unseen, between truth and falsehood, between above and below, disappeared, and his formless thought hung suspended in emptiness. Then he clutched at his gray head and cried frantically, "I cannot think! I cannot think!" Not all, however, succumb to the look of death. In some life is stronger and triumphs. To such belonged Emperor Augustus. "You have killed me, Lazarus," he cries, almost overcome. This cry recalls him to life and he is saved. He remembers the people whose shield and protector he was, and who needed him. "No, you did not kill me, Lazarus," he said firmly, "but I'll kill you. Go." Here we see that for all our author's pessimism, death is not always the supreme and final power. Certain forces at the command of the Superman seem to be capable of coping successfully with it. This idea recurs in Andreyev's works under various forms. In The Seven who were hanged, death is treated in quite a different aspect. Not so much in a philosophical presentation of the problem as in a psychologic and realistic study. 5 of the 7 condemned to death are political offenders, 2 are common criminals. The theme of the story is the way in which each of them receives the death sentence, what their inner experiences and feelings are in the interval between the sentence and the execution, and how they meet death. In the wonderfully realistic pictures of the 7, Andreyev reveals at length that power of which we catch only occasional glimpses in his other writings. Stripped of his impressionism, Andreyev appears as a master, not of abstractions, not of symbols, as in his other works, but of the individual human character, the individual soul, and the concrete personality. The 7 Who Were Hanged is a fearfully human story. Though we are introduced to the characters only when they are about to die, we learn to know them intimately and follow their remaining fortunes with interest. Here we have, pure and unadulterated, that Russian realism which finds its highest expression in Tolstoy, and which makes literature so awfully like life. Here the 2 Russian authors, so different in the quality of their talent and in the methods they pursue, almost meet. Andreyev's The 7 Who Were Hanged and Tolstoy's 3 Deaths might have come from the pen of the same author. Another theme which bulks large in Andreyev's books is loneliness. Ever so many of his characters are afflicted with that malady. They are deathly lonely. In the city they seek to escape from it in the country. In the country they seek to escape from it in the city. Vain effort. They can't escape it. It is in their constitutions. The crowd, the city, only intensify their agony, merely serve to emphasize their awful loneliness. The intensified loneliness in the city is fully worked out in a short story, The City. As the lonely hero, Petrov, sits in his room, he feels that each man passing by in the street is a world by himself with his woman whom he loves, with his own joys and sorrows. Each one is a phantom, appearing for a moment, and disappearing again, unrecognized, unknown. And the more people there are who do not know each other, the more terrible is the loneliness of each. In the dark, noisy nights, Petrov often felt like shrieking with terror, like slinking away somewhere in a deep cellar and being altogether alone. Then he could think only of those whom he knew and not feel so infinitely alone in the midst of crowds of strangers. Thus the size of the city and its large population became a source of terror to him. There was something obstinate, unconquerable, and cruelly indifferent in that vast herding together of people, in that bigness. Another indictment of the city is its leveling effect, its dissolution of individuality, most vigorously depicted in that peculiarly subjective representation of the city, The Curse of the Beast. I am afraid of the city. I love the wild ocean and the forest. So the story begins. At the same time, the hero is forcibly attracted to it. The call of the city proves too strong, and he hurries thither to drown his loneliness and become one of its little waves. Yet he soon grows lonely again. The numbers do not relieve his loneliness. They make it only the more oppressive. What are the millions of people but a repetition of one and the same individual? There are 2 million human beings here, repeating 2 million times the selfsame I. The city produces fatal, tragic sameness where there should be difference. All lose their eyes in it, because each is compelled to crawl into one and the same form. So disgusted does the hero of the story become with this disindividualizing action of the city that he is pained to think that human beings must have any similar attributes at all. He is pained that everyone must have a nose, a stomach, and must think and feel according to the same textbooks on logic and psychology. We have seen that on the one hand Andreev has command over a wide range of subjects and that on the other he seems to be attracted, nay, obsessed, by one or two ideas which appear and reappear in almost all his works. But that involves no contradiction. Despite the variety of his topics, there is one point of view from which his work is done, and it is this point of view which, running like a thread through all his creations, unifies them and gives them meaning and significance. It is this point of view also from which his favorite subjects are treated, so that through it they assume universal importance. At the conclusion of his Sebastopol, Tolstoy speaks of the absence of a hero in his book. But, he continues, the hero of my story, whom I love with all the powers of my soul, whom I have striven to reproduce in all his beauty, and who always has been, is, and will be beautiful, is truth. In a modified form, Andreyev's hero is the same. Name me the name, cries Anathema to some one guarding the entrance to the beyond. Light the path for the devil and for man. All in the world want the good, and they know not where to find it. All in the world want life, and they find only death. The name, name me the name of goodness, name me the name of eternal life. I am waiting. Andreev forever asks this question: how shall we make life livable? How reconcile our feeling of what life ought to be with the evils which fill the world? Andreyev, contrary to the general notion, does not, I think, hate life. He loves it. It is because he loves it that all the misery and wrongs and ills of the world so appall him. He wants to solve the riddle. What does it all mean? Why, after a wretched life, such as the average life is today, such as the life described in his drama, The Life of Man, comes death? It is not death per se, then, not a morbid fancy, such as those in which Poe so loved to indulge for their own sake, that preoccupies Andreyev's mind. Andreyev dwells on death because he desires eternal life, just as he dwells on the horrors of life because he wants the good. His whole literary activity is an endeavor to solve the conflict between reason, which condemns life, and feeling, which affirms it. Considered in this way, Andreyev's works, from the first to the last, form an organic unit, and show a continuous growth along the line of this central thought. I shall endeavor, in the remainder of this paper, to trace the development of Andreyev's view of the world, his Weltanschauung, from some of his typical plays. His very first play, To the Stars, 1905, turns upon this conflict between life as it is and the refusal of reason to accept it. Sergei Timovsky, a celebrated astronomer, has withdrawn entirely from the world and lives in his astronomical observatory, perched somewhere high up in the mountains. Down below on the earth a bloody revolution is going on in which his son Nikolai and other members of his family are fighting. But he remains unconcerned. He has turned his back on the earth with its senseless evils, and lives a cosmic life among the stars. He seeks to find the meaning of life away from the world, away from the dark shades of the earth, its vain cares, death, injustice, misfortune. Vain cares, asks one of the characters sardonically. So, if a new Napoleon should arise tomorrow, a new despot, and grip the whole world in his iron fist, would that be a vain care too? Yes, I think so. And when his son is imprisoned, having narrowly escaped being shot to death, he remains just as serene. How can I cry in despair, he says, over the death of one man, when in the world a man dies every second, and in the universe probably a whole world is destroyed every second? Sergei Timovsky has escaped from life on earth because life on earth is senseless. Man thinks only about his life and about his death. That's why life is so terrible for him. That's why he feels as dull and tedious as a flea that has strayed into a marble vault. To fill out the terrible void, he invents with vigorous intellect a lot of beautiful things, but in all his inventions he speaks only about his death, only about his life, and his terror grows. He is like a keeper of a museum with wax figures. Yes, like a keeper of a museum with wax figures. By day he talks to his visitors and takes money from them, and at night, all alone, he walks about terrified among the dead, the lifeless, and the soulless. If only he knew that life is everywhere. So he has taken refuge from the museum of waxen figures, and found life in the great cosmic whole. He has learned to hear the song of the stars. They sing, and their song is mysterious as eternity. He who but once hears their voice, coming from the depths of boundless stretches of space, becomes a son of eternity. Yes, a son of eternity, as man will be called some day. But for a while Temovsky loses his Superman attitude when he learns that his splendid son has turned an idiot through the outrages committed upon him in prison. He yields to almost normal human emotion. Soon, however, he regains his self-composure and again mounts his exalted heights where there is no misfortune, no death. Nikolai didn't die. He is in you, in me, in all, he says to Marussia, his son's fiancée. Only the beasts die, those who have no faces. Only those die who kill, not those who are killed. Those who are killed live forever. There is no death for man, no death for the son of eternity. In contrast to Temovsky, Marussia surrenders completely to her despair and can find no comfort in the all-embracing yet extra-human philosophy of the Superman. "Accursed life!" she cries. "Where then is the God of that life? Where is he looking? Accursed life! To melt in tears, to die, to disappear! Why live when the best perish, when the beautiful form of Nikolai is broken? Do you understand, father? There is no justification for life. There is no justification for it." Yet, despite the evils of the world, she cannot abandon life. She must go back to the earth. The earth breathes dread and sorrow, but I was born of the earth, and I bear her sufferings in my blood. The stars are foreign to me. I do not know who dwells there. Like a wounded bird, my soul falls again and again to the earth. I'll go. I will keep like a sacred relic what is left of Nikolai, his thought, his love, his gentleness. And the drama ends this way. Temovsky, with his arms raised to the stars. "I greet you, my distant, my unknown friend." Marussia, with her arms extended to the earth. "I greet you, my dear, my suffering brother." Temovsky's wife. "Oh, my darling son, my darling son." To the stars, then, merely puts the question, puts it definitely and squarely, but does not pretend to answer it. It is a broad question, to be sure. What is life? What is its meaning? How make it endurable? How reconcile the evil in the world with faith in life, which is necessary to give it a meaning? But it is a question which constantly preoccupies Andreyev. Temovsky thinks he has found an answer in a sort of negation of the world, a world of abstraction. But Marussia is a stranger to his world. The son of eternity is a mere phrase to her. She does not feel him with her heart. And so, though her reason pulls her away from the earth, her heart attracts her to it, and she obeys the stronger force. For the mother, such a struggle between reason and love does not even exist. She implicitly obeys the all-conquering maternal instinct. "Oh, my darling son." The next play, Saba, 1906, which appeared only 4 months later, is artistically a far superior piece of work. Technically, To the Stars can scarcely be regarded as a play. It is rather a series of conversations, flowing along easily enough and interestingly enough, but not connected by any action or plot, even in the modern sense of the word plot. In fact, all the action there happens elsewhere, not on the stage, and is only talked about in the play. One of the leading characters, Nikolai, who never appears in person. All he is and all he does are conveyed indirectly. Saba, on the other hand, is a play well knit together. It has plenty of action, all bearing naturally and directly upon the central plot, and the interest grows steadily until the strikingly powerful denouement in the last act. The characters also are carefully drawn. Each stands out as a vivid, well defined personality, the more important ones, Saba, his sister Olympiada, and Kondraty, revealing themselves in all their strength and weakness, the minor ones drawn in a few broad, masterly strokes. Though not devoid of philosophical import, Saba may be enjoyed simply and plainly as an ordinary play. Saba is an anarchist and has come to the conclusion that the only way of regenerating the world is by making a clean sweep of everything, by uprooting the entire old fabric, laying the earth bare, as he says. Killing off obnoxious officials singly, as mere terrorists do, is futile, because no sooner is one tyrant removed than another arises in his place. So the destruction must be undertaken on a huge scale. As a preliminary to this he starts out with a rather innocent plot to blow up a wonder-working icon of the Savior in a famous monastery at a time when large crowds of pilgrims shall have gathered there for a holiday. By a series of explosions of this nature he hopes to destroy the superstitious prejudices of the people, making them see that dynamite is stronger than their God, and that man is stronger than dynamite. Then they will realize that the kingdom of their God is at an end, and that the kingdom of man has come. His plan miscarries, its failure giving the monks an opportunity of practicing still further deception upon the people by working on their superstitious gullibility, while Saba, on being discovered as the author of the plot, is killed by a mob of pilgrims. The play is among Andreev's best works and deserves fuller treatment than is consistent with the scope of this paper. It has been put on the stage in Berlin and Vienna, but its production is prohibited in Russia. About 7 months after the appearance of Saba came The Life of Man. Thus 3 of the plays upon which Andreev's reputation as a dramatist in no small degree rests were crowded together in a period of less than 1 year. November 1905 to September 1906. The Life of Man is one of the boldest and, in the opinion of the writer, one of the most successful attempts of its kind in dramatic literature. It is abstraction in art raised to the highest conceivable power. Andreyev set himself no less a task than to write in this one play, consisting of 5 scenes and a prologue, all that the title signifies, The Life of Man, of every man. It is meant to comprise all the essential elements that enter into the average human life. Like an algebraic formula, it can be applied to every special case. In fact, in external workmanship it strongly suggests a mathematical formula. It is precise, accurate, and stiff as a paradigm. Scene 1, the birth of man and the mother's travail. Scene 2, love and poverty. Scene 3, a ball at man's. Scene 4, man's misfortune. Scene 5, the death of man. In each scene you find what you expect. There are no surprises. There must be none, for it is the life of the average man, but the throb of life is there as truly as in a character of Shakespeare or Dickens, or any particular individual of your literary or actual acquaintance. Andreyev has the peculiar power of re-embodying the disembodied, of making the spiritual tangible, the abstract concrete. He himself calls it the neo-realistic drama. What peculiar virtue must reside in a name? The neo-realist, in the character of Andreyev, simply goes ahead and quietly does what the futurist so loudly professes but fails to perform. Look and listen, you who have come here to laugh and be amused. There will pass before you the whole life of man, from his dark beginning to his dark ending. Thus opening the play, someone in gray, forecasts the life of man in one brief paragraph. Being born, he will take the form and the name of man, and in all things will become like other men already living. And their hard lot will be his lot, and his hard lot will be the lot of all human beings. Inexorably impelled by time, he will, with inavertible necessity, pass through all the stages of human life, from the bottom to the top, from the top to the bottom. Limited in vision, he will never see the next step which his unsteady foot, poised in the air, is in the very act of taking. Limited in knowledge, he will never know what the coming day will bring, what the coming hour, the coming minute. In his unseeing blindness, troubled by premonitions, agitated by hope and fear, he will submissively complete the iron traced circle foreordained. Man appears on the scene as a young man, poor and starving, but, despite his suffering, capable now and then of forgetting his misery, happy in his youth and in the love which he and his wife bear each other. He has lost his father in his early childhood, and has had a hard struggle making his own way through school and college. Now he is an architect, unable to obtain employment. Suddenly his work gains vogue. He grows prominent and rich. The next scene represents a ball given by a man in his sumptuous house of 15 rooms. The cold, formal atmosphere in the medium of wealth and luxury contrasts sharply with the genial warmth of poverty in the former picture. In the next scene he has grown poor again. His home is neglected, only a couple of rooms being occupied, the rest remaining empty and being infested with rats. And as the last crushing blow, his good son is treacherously wounded by a bad man and dies. The reader will have noted the autobiographical character of the first part. Like man, Andreyev, through the early loss of his parents, had a hard struggle with poverty from his boyhood on, and then jumped into fame as suddenly as man. The play is as compact in structure as it is rich in symbolic meaning. Very curious, as contrasting with the impression of the extreme modernity of the drama, are the crude and primitive methods which Andreyev uses without the least scruple. In the second scene, man's wife indulges in a long monologue to tell the audience the past history of the hero. And in the fourth scene, an old servant is conveniently made to talk to herself and blab out all that has happened since the ball at man's. But these crudities, far from jarring, seem to fall in quite harmoniously with the general atmosphere of the play, which is all in the region of the primitive. The life of man again puts the emphasis on the question of the meaning of life. The riddling nature of it is here personified in the figure of someone in gray. Though man's constant companion, nothing definite is known about him, whence the indefiniteness of his name. I don't know who you are, God, devil, fate, or life. Though man's constant companion, he stands by, looking on with cold indifference, no matter what happens, and every appeal to him falls upon deaf ears. It will be remembered how Andreyev speaks of the cruel indifference of the city. It is but one of the aspects of the cruel indifference of life in general, which he pictures in various forms. Here it is summed up and concentrated in someone. Someone becomes the symbol, the incarnation of this indifference. The mystery of life and death, and the indifference of nature, is the wall against which human reason has been knocking in vain, which it has never succeeded in penetrating. Again and again the mystery is dwelt upon. What does it all mean? How take life? It is the thirst for a Weltanschauung that so characterizes the moderns. Hitherto non-existent, says someone, mysteriously hidden in the infinity of time, neither feeling nor thinking, and known to no one. Man will mysteriously break through the prison of non-being and with a cry announce the beginning of his brief life. In the night of non-existence a light will go up, kindled by an unseen hand. It is the life of man. Behold the flame! It is the life of man. Coming from the night, he will return to the night and go out leaving no trace behind. He will go into the infinity of time, neither thinking nor feeling, and known to no one. The indifference of fate to men's desires, running parallel to this mystery, is brought out with equal force and insistence. It is not in answer to the prayer of man's wife that he was relieved of his poverty and given affluence. His fate had been decided independently beforehand. She knows not, says someone, immediately after her prayer, that her wish has already been fulfilled. She knows not that this morning two men in a rich house were bending over a sketch by man and were delighted with it. And when man, swallowing his pride, goes down on his knees for the first time in his life and prays that his son may be spared, again no heed is paid to his heaven-stirring appeal. Events take their inexorable course regardless of human wishes. Man has fallen into a sound, sweet sleep, deceived by hope. He knows not that in a few moments his son will die. In mysterious dream fancies a picture of impossible happiness arises before him. The pessimism of the life of man is even more pronounced than that of To the Stars. The meaninglessness of existence is the more accentuated in that it is exemplified in a life by no means below the average in its share of happiness. And yet what does it all amount to? Man departs, leaving no trace. The fashion has changed. His work is no longer wanted. He seems to be entirely forgotten even before his death. With what eagerness he clutches at a mere straw of hope that his work will continue to live. Wife. I saw a young artist near that house, a house built by man. He studied it carefully and made a sketch of it in his sketch-book. Man. Ah, why didn't you tell me that? It's highly significant. Highly significant. It means that my ideas are accepted and handed down by others, and even if I am forgotten, my ideas will live. It is tremendously significant. And again he recurs to it. At the moment it seems to him so significant. It has sent a ray of brightness into my heart. But what is the net result? What kind of showing does man's life make when the balance is struck and the final accounting turned in? Defeat. He withdraws from the battlefield vanquished and slinks away to die in loneliness in the cellar of a saloon. Here is the summing up of it in man's curse. I curse everything that you have given. I curse the day on which I was born. I curse the day on which I shall die. I curse the whole of my life. I fling everything back at your cruel face, senseless fate. Be accursed. Be forever accursed. With my curses I conquer you. What else can you do to me? With my last thought I will shout into your asinine ears, Be accursed! Be accursed! The curse is an acknowledgment of material defeat, but it also signifies spiritual victory. The spirit of man remains unbroken. With my curses I conquer you. Spiritual victory. The all-conquering human spirit is to atone for the ills of outer existence. It alone vindicates life and gives it that meaning which is not to be found in the external world of the senses, and without which it is intolerable. Some such faith Andreyev must have always had. Traces of it, rather faint to be sure, are discoverable here and there. It could not have been very strong. It was not a dominating note, but a timid voice of weakly protest in an overpowering chorus of condemnation. For a long time Andreyev seems not to have been able to arrive at a direct affirmative answer to the question of the worthwhileness of life. Apparently he vacillated between his faith and its awful alternative, sometimes leaning to the bright side, sometimes to the gloomy side, though never completely losing hope in the possibility of some favorable solution. In The Life of Man the dismal note predominates and the saving faith scarcely shows itself. In To the Stars, on the other hand, despite the skepticism, the other side is given a fair hearing. The justification of life is found in the Superman's power to rise superior to the evils of the outer world, just as in Lazarus. Augustus, by his Superman strength, is able to subdue the influence of the look of death. Moreover, some day all will be children of eternity, as the astronomer says, that is, all will be Superman, and life will be vindicated for all. But the first time Andreyev meets the question, is life worth while, with an emphatic and unequivocal yes, is in his drama Anathema. Gradually, by painful struggling and searching, Andreyev appears to have worked his way to this position, and Anathema therefore represents the highest and most positive stage in the development of his thought. Though in a religious garb, Anathema is but a variation of that theme which, as we have seen, forms the kernel of Andreyev's works. Anathema, who is none other than the devil, appears before someone watching at the gate that divides off the world accessible to reason from the region in which dwells the origin of all being, the great universal intelligence, and asks him to open the gate for an instant that he may take a look at eternity. "I'll become a god," he says. "I'll become a god. I have been wanting to become a god ever so long." He crawls on his belly, imploring someone. Even if he has no heart, he has reason, which is seeking the truth. "Here am I at your feet. Open your face to me but for an instant as brief as a flash of lightning. You refuse? Then name me the name of him who is behind the gate. Does it not consist of 7 letters? Of 6? Of 1? Name me but one letter, and you will save me from eternal torture." Failing to get a satisfactory answer, Anathema descends to the earth, declaring that to prove the injustice and the meaninglessness of life he will give David Leiser, a poor, unfortunate Jew, wealth, power, and fame. He will make him a great man, living a life such as by all the rules of reason should result only in the general good and in the highest good of David himself, but which, as he knows from the way of the world, will lead to David's destruction and to much evil. He will show by David's career the nothingness of human existence. He will proclaim through David's mouth the truth about the destiny of man. The 6 scenes following the prologue are taken up with David's life. How Anathema made him the heir of millions, and how instead of using the money for himself, he gave it to the poor and to the children. And David Leiser's name spread far and wide, and he was honored and revered above all, and the report went abroad that he could even perform wonders, and people came to him from the ends of the earth to worship him and to be healed. But when he had given away all his money and had no more to give, the people turned against him, crying that he had betrayed them, and stoned him to death. Armed with this evidence from the life of David, who, because of his material limitations, is unable to help the people in the way they want to be helped and need to be helped, and is therefore killed by them, Anathema again ascends to the confines of the rational world, and demands, "Give me the name of him who brought about the destruction of David and of thousands of people. I am Anathema, and I have no heart. My eyes have been dried by the fires of hell, and there are no tears in them. But had I any tears, I would give them all to David. I have no heart, but there were moments when something living stirred in my bosom, and I was frightened. Can a heart be born? I saw how David was killed, and with him thousands of people. I saw how his spirit, black and pitifully shriveled, like a worm dried in the sun, was hurled down into the source of non-existence, into my abode of gloom and death. Say, was it not you that killed David?" In someone's answer to this question lies the whole significance of the drama. It is the most direct and the most definite expression of Andreyev's religion. David has achieved immortality, and he lives immortal in the deathlessness of fire. David has achieved immortality, and he lives immortal in the deathlessness of light, which is life. Still, Anathema continues to press his questions. Did not David love? Answer. Did not David give away his soul? Answer. And did they not stone David who had given away his soul? Answer. Not having satisfied the hunger of the hungry, not having restored sight to the blind and life to those who died innocently, and having produced dissensions and disputes and cruel shedding of blood, for the people have already arisen against one another, and commit violence, murder, and robbery in the name of David. All this being so, did not David proclaim the impotence of love, and did he not cause great harm, which can be counted in numbers and measured with measures? Yes, someone answers. David did what you said he did, and the people did what you accuse them of having done, and the numbers do not lie, and the scales are true, and every measure is that which it is. But not with measures are measured, nor with numbers are counted, nor with scales are weighed the things that you, Anathema, do not know. There are no limits to light, and no definite bounds to the fire's flame. There is a red fire, there is a yellow fire, there is a white fire in which the sun would burn away like straw. And there is still another, an unseen fire, the name of which no one knows, for no bounds are set to the fire's flame. Killed in numbers, dead in measures and in scales, David has achieved immortality in the deathlessness of fire. Anathema is hardly recognizable as the devil. He bears but slight resemblance to the conventional spirit of evil. He is not the tempter in Goethe's Mephistophelian sense, nor in that same sense is he the spirit that denies. He is a new creation in literature, an original conception of Satan. He is the spirit of investigation, the scientist. He wants proofs. He wants to be shown. He cannot believe without observation. He is reason without feeling. He has no heart, and he therefore cannot feel his way to faith. He cannot feel that human life justifies itself and is founded upon a rational basis. But he burns with a desire to find out. He is consumed with a passion for truth. Oh, for one peep into eternity! And if he tempts to do evil, he does so to gratify this ruling passion, not out of original sin, not out of a desire to destroy. And if he is a skeptic, it is also because of his passion for truth, and not from a desire to deny. Andreev's devil is the passion for truth. Who loves truth more than Anathema? Wise Anathema grieving for the truth? I am weary of searching. I am tired of living and being tortured in a vain chase for that which eternally eludes. Give me death, but do not afflict me with blindness. All who strive for truth, who hold reason in esteem, are his friends. He constantly appeals to them as those who love the devil. But because he can see only with reason, he is destined never to know the truth. Anathema. Tell me, will Anathema ever see the gate open? Will I ever behold your face? Someone. No, never. My face is open, but you do not see it. My speech is loud, but you do not hear it. My precepts are clear, but you do not know them. Anathema. And you will never see, and you will never hear, and you will never know. Anathema. Unhappy spirit, deathless in numbers, eternally living in measures and in scales, but not yet born for life. For a picture of the world as a vale of tears, there is in the whole of literature scarcely the like of Anathema, and when one tries to analyze, one hardly knows how the effect is produced. Surely not by the ordinary means of the drama, for it can scarcely be called a drama. It is a succession of pictures, and for the general impression it would make little difference if, with the exception of the prologue and the last scene, their order were reversed. So it is futile to judge the play by ordinary standards. If we did, the verdict of absolute condemnation would be easy and unmistakable. But Andreyev wrings pity from our hearts and touches us with wonderfully warm emotions in behalf of poor humanity. Let not critics step in where angels fear to tread. The pathos of the drama proper is as great as the extraordinary grandeur of the prologue and the finale. The little play here given is one of those humorous bits that Andreyev now and then throws off in his happy moments. They come to him so rarely that when they do come they seem to burst upon him like uninvited but welcome guests. The pretty Sabine women needs no commentary. It is as clear as a story by Mark Twain, and equally pure fun. Of course, it is not without its lesson, and not without satire. How can a Russian writer ever quite forget himself to that extent? The lesson is direct action, and what political actionist, however extreme, would not vote with Andreyev if, as a Russian, he decides in favor of direct action against legalism? End of Leonid Andreyev by Thomas Seltzer. Section blank of the Drama Quarterly. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by BellonaTimes. Act 1, Scene 5 of Macbeth by William Shakespeare. Inverness, Macbeth's castle. Enter Lady Macbeth, reading a letter. They met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report that they have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air, into which they vanished. Whiles I stood wrapped in the wonder of it came missives from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me, and referred me to the coming on of time with Hail, King, that shalt be. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Lay it to thy heart, and farewell. Unquote. Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised, yet do I fear thy nature, it is too full o' the milk of human kindness, to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, that wouldst thou holily, wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Thou'ldst have, great Glamis, that which cries, thus thou must do, if thou have it, and that which rather thou dost fear to do than wishest should be undone. Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valor of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal. Enter a messenger. What is your tidings? The king comes here tonight. Thou'rt mad to say it. Is not thy master with him, who, wert so, would have informed for preparation? So please you, it is true, our Thane is coming. One of my fellows had the speed of him, who, almost dead for breath, had scarcely more than would make up his message. Give him tending. He brings great news. Exit messenger. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect of and it. Come to my woman's breasts, and take my milk for gall, your murthering ministers, wherever in your slightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. Come, thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, Hold! Hold! Enter Macbeth. Great Glamis, worthy Cotter, greater than both, by the all hail hereafter! Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant. My dearest love, Duncan comes here to-night. And when goes hence? To-morrow, as he proposes. O never shall sun that morrow see. Your face, my Thane, is as a book where men may read strange matters. To beguile the time, look like the time, bear welcome in your eye. Your hand, your tongue, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. He that's coming must be provided for, and you shall put this night's great business into my dispatch, which shall to all our nights and days to come give solely sovereign sway and masterdom. We will speak further. Only look up clear. To alter favor ever is to fear. Leave all the rest to me. Excellent. End of section blank. Characterization versus Situation by Annie Nathan Meyer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. Characterization versus Situation by Annie Nathan Meyer. For the Drama, a Quarterly Review, February 1918. The well-known playwright Hartley Manners has just declared that the development of character is the only real problem for the dramatist, and that a play cannot be said to be formless which successfully portrays the human beings it sets before us. The only real form I feel disposed to recognize in writing for the theater, he says, is the consistent development of character. Let situation take care of itself. Character makes situation. More and more I think this point of view has come to be representative of the most sincere playwrights, but obviously it is not one to which the manager will readily subscribe. Not because the manager may not be sufficiently enlightened to realize that the truest action may be internal, an invisible struggle between clashing wills rather than a visible fight between clashing bodies, but because once granted that characterization is of crucial importance, the manager will have to treat the text of a play with far greater respect and consideration than up to the present moment he has been inclined to do. To speak to the actor of types is to make him see red. But though I say it with fear in my heart, I really believe that many plays have been misinterpreted by a lack of the proper types. I have all due respect for the art of miming, which permits one temperament to simulate another. I appreciate the wizardry of a clever make-up, but obviously there are limits beyond which one cannot go without distorting the author's meaning. I hold no brief for the theory that one's appearance off the stage should be the sole or even the most important test for the doling out of parts. I am perfectly willing that the test should be applied only to one's appearance on the stage. Nevertheless, while our modern audiences are more sensitive to the realistic atmosphere of a play than to the declamation of sonorous soliloquies, the sense of reality that an actor is able to impart to a characterization is of fundamental and constantly growing importance. To remind me that Conway Turrell is not always the fascinating lover, but was admirably real as that tough citizen, Bill Walker, in Major Barbara. To remind me that Sarah Bernhardt, an old and crippled woman, can brilliantly portray a youthful soldier. That O.P. Hedgie is equally delightful as a bored young millionaire, a plodding old clerk, or a gentle martyr of the early Christian church is quite beside the mark, for these did fully succeed in creating on the stage the desired impression. That is all I ask. We must, of course, safeguard the tradition of the art of acting. We must ridicule out of court the manager who is of so inelastic a mind as to hold that red hair and freckles, in order to get across, must be a matter of roots and pigment. He should hold seriously and courageously to a faith that the characters that have been painfully and conscientiously evolved by the playwright must interpret the author's intentions both spiritually and outwardly. The test of an orchestral performance is the smooth and beautiful rendering of the ideas of the composer, and to give a smooth and beautiful rendering of the ideas of the playwright is, or should be, the test of a stage production. I need scarcely say that I do not seriously object to Miss Barrymore's blonde wig in the latest, though who shall say the last, revival of La Dame aux Camélias, notwithstanding Dumasfil's description of Marguerite's black curls, nor am I greatly disturbed by the raven locks of Mr. Turl in the place of the blond hair bestowed on Armand by his creator. But I have in mind certain recently produced plays the meaning of which has been utterly distorted by the managerial tendency to cast an eye upon the drawing powers of a star instead of on the sincere interpretation of the play. How different is the case of the other arts! We shudder as we recall that Rembrandt's Night Watch was cut to make it fit into a certain space in the Burghers' Hall. We would probably rain protests upon the daring conductor who would play as presto the adagio even of a living composer who is not a classic. The integrity of a musical composition, a picture, or a statue is well recognized. In the case of even so much discussed and vilified a piece of sculpture as Barnard's Lincoln, it is quite understood that it is to be taken as is, or not at all. No one, so far as I know, has suggested that the hands be forcibly removed from the pit of the stomach, or that a Roman toga be thrown carelessly over the shoulders, not by the sculptor, mind you, but by someone else, who, not by birth, by association, or by culture, may be supposed to enter into the spirit of the creator. Now, while the immediate cause of this outburst is the production in New York of a highly successful play, Why Marry, by Jesse Lynch Williams, nevertheless, I have long nursed within me an indignant protest that the clear intention of the playwright is so often ignored. Take the case of one of our great American plays, The Great Divide, by William Moody, a distinguished poet who, if any one could, would have spoken to the managerial ear with authority. I saw its first production in New York with Mr. Henry Miller as Ghent and Miss Margaret Anglin as Ruth Jordan. I saw it some years later, with Ghent acted again by Mr. Miller and Ruth Gordon acted by Miss Gladys Hanson, a more beautiful and less mature woman than Miss Anglin, but neither actress remotely approached the young heroine imagined by Mr. Moody. An admirer of Mr. Moody's verse and his other play, The Faith Healer, nevertheless I had always resented the high position which the judgment of the best critics had given to The Great Divide. The motivation, from the heroine's offer of marriage to her dislike of her offspring, seemed to me poor and inconclusive. Moreover, her failure to play the game, above all her utterly abnormal, or shall I say subnormal, horror of the marital relation, her passionate reproach to her husband for not dwelling longer in platonic companionship, even while she admitted the beauty and chivalry of his conduct, admitted too that time was drawing them swiftly together, frankly disgusted me. Miss Anglin made her simply a disagreeable, nagging woman. Miss Hanson softened my irritation by so much as an entrancing exterior could, but neither gave me the slightest clue as to what the author really intended. Remember, he had not drawn an ordinary New England spinster. At the rising of the curtain she refused the hand of a cultured gentleman from the Eastern States because he was too finished a product. Everything, her love of the West, its wild scenery, its wilder men, was calculated to show she was anything but the Puritan, with sluggish, anemic blood creeping through her veins. One moment she was painted as a poetic, temperamental, imaginative, brave, fine and true, flying straight as an arrow to the heart of her mate; the next literal, implacable, unimaginative, cowardly, untrue and resentful. Moreover, what could be a falser note, so I reasoned, than her indifference to her own baby, if we were to accept the final curtain that she had always recognized in Ghent her true lover and sought for mate? Whether her pride rebelled or not, the child was flesh and bone of the man she loved, and she inevitably would have poured all her poor, wronged affection on her offspring, hers and his. And what was the motive that made her choose Ghent of the three men as they stood there coveting her body? As played by Mr. Miller, with his wide brimmed hat well over his face, you remember, and well in the shadows so that his age would not tell too heavily against him, it certainly looked as if Ruth went for the protection to the larger, more powerful, or at least fatter of the men. Not a glimpse was there of the poetic idea that, notwithstanding all the horror and the terror, the young thing had recognized her own true mate, not a suggestion that under it all heart spoke to heart. No, for the author had set it down: Ghent is younger than Dutch, and taller, but less powerfully built. So it was something else than brute strength that caused Ruth, little Ruth, poor distracted child, to give herself to the one for life, trusting him to keep his bargain. Little Ruth, poor distracted child. Does this seem rather inappropriate language to apply to either of the mature women who acted the part? But the author says plainly: Ruth Jordan, a girl of 19, stands at the window looking out. Now, I have always held that no play can be known solely by its stage production, any more than it can be realized solely through its publication, unless the stage production given it is perfect in its attunement to the spirit and intent of the author. Therefore, I have always maintained that one should not reach a definite conclusion about a play until one has both read it and seen it acted. One's final judgment depends not so much upon whether one first sees it or reads it, as upon the emphasis one chooses to place upon plot or acting. I have frequently had occasion to point out the fact that being familiar with the plot of a play places one's interest upon its rendition. The comparative unfamiliarity of the average American audience with the printed drama is one of the basic causes for the careless, incomplete stage productions that many of our playwrights have to submit to or go unproduced. I confess I was skeptical of great results from reading The Great Divide, after having twice seen it performed. And yet on the very first page I came across this description of Ruth Jordan as a young girl of 19, as by magic shedding a light on the entire play, changing it in my eyes from a most uneven, uncertainly, and poorly motivated piece of work to that play which combines more than any other work of an American dramatist a serious interpretation of life, treated with poetic imagination and joined to a tense dramatic situation. Do I exaggerate the potency of the printed version? I think not, for it is obvious to the most unthinking that the reactions of a romantically inclined child of 19 are very different from those of a mature woman, and all the indecisions, the suppressed tendernesses, the gusts of exaggerated horror, the absence of poise and understanding which repelled me in the one, I found perfectly natural, indeed touchingly pathetic, in the other. Also the rash adventure of the intoxicated Ghent takes on quite other proportions when one reflects that it was the action, not of a mature man of 40, but of a wild and careless youth whose character was still in the making. This to me is perhaps the most flagrant example of the exigencies of histrionic egoism. Or it may have been mere managerial confidence in the stellar system, which destroyed the true values of a great and beautiful play. Truly, here indeed was a case which proved the truth of Mr. Manners' dictum, character makes situation. And so we come to Why Marry, that brilliant comedy by Mr. Jesse Lynch Williams, which is now being performed in New York with a company which in cruder days would have been announced as an all-star cast, every one of whom is admirable except for the fact that four of them bear not the slightest resemblance to anything the author ever intended them to be. No wonder Mr. Williams has just indulged in a highly indiscreet interview in which he declares himself by no means won over to being a playwright. He admits: "The disappointments are far keener when you write a play. You have built up a character, endowing it with flesh and blood, and then when you see the poor, distorted creature wandering out there before your eyes, you wonder how it could have happened." We have long heard the wail of the unproduced playwright. This, you see, is a cry from the heart of the produced, successful playwright. The first instance of miscasting in Why Marry is Miss Beatrice Beckley as Lucy, John's wife, who is supposed to epitomize the evils of the old-fashioned union. When one recalls that Miss Beckley made an admirable Vivie Warren in last year's revival of Mrs. Warren's Profession, that she was again admirably cast as the very up-to-date woman physician in Eugene Walter's The Knife, it is not difficult to imagine that she is not happy in the part of Mrs. John. It is no criticism of her art to say that her large masculine frame and height, her assertiveness, her deep voice and precise enunciation, highly characteristic as they are of her own personality, do not lend themselves readily to the interpretation of a timorous echo of her husband's wishes. The part of the more intrepid Jean was taken by a mere strip of a girl, and had the audience been permitted to read Mr. Williams' description of the two women, it would certainly have been amused to think that Lucy was supposed to be a great contrast to Jean's more modern, less delicate charm. Furthermore, that Jean is frank and brave, Lucy indirect and timid, pretty but fading, 40 but fighting it. But these two instances of the ignoring of an author's conception are slight insignificance compared to the crucial mischaracterizations of the hero and heroine. To put it bluntly, did Mr. Williams write an amusing, light, very light comedy as a vehicle, hateful term for two attractive young matinee idols, or did he put his finger on a real difficulty of modern economic conditions? The postponement of marriage until middle age has secured a competence and interpret it in terms of the drama, incidentally, by the way, shedding a highly illuminative light upon such accessory questions as the economic independence of the married woman, the training of young girls to be self-supporting, the pecuniary reward of scientists and clergymen, and the problem of divorce thrown in for good measure. The heroine, Helen, a more or less new woman, as the author describes her, is impersonated by Miss Estelle Winwood, one of the sweetest, daintiest young actresses on the stage, a veritable sylph with a soft little voice with a wonderfully appealing note in it. And yet the author, who, come to think on it, ought to know, describes her as a beautiful woman of 29, tall, strong, glorious, plenty of old-fashioned charm, despite her new-fashioned ideas. Now, charming as Miss Winwood undoubtedly is, a rarely appealing figure, nevertheless, she is just as much like a college graduate of nearly 30 who has been conducting difficult research work at a scientific institute, as a fine Arabian charger is like a dray horse. Far be it from me to deny that a laboratory assistant may be beautiful. Far be it from my purpose to assert notwithstanding the dictum of George Eliot that a rare and brilliant scientific ability cannot be coupled with personal charm, yet not even her most ardent admirer would think of describing Miss Winwood as a tall, glorious creature. Moreover, it does tax the credulity to imagine her with one eye screwed into the nozzle of a microscope. I assure you to hear her suddenly in the course of her pretended love-making give utterance to the terrible words anterior poliomyelitis was quite as much a shock to the audience as to her listeners on the stage. After all, it is a well-known axiom that in art it is not the truth that is so important as the appearance of truth. To be exact means little, to be convincing everything. We as an audience scarcely concern ourselves with the question if any young physician who has inoculated himself for yellow fever and devoted the rest of his days to the pursuit of the germ of anterior poliomyelitis can possibly be as good looking as Shelley Hull, or with the problem whether any laboratory assistant could possibly look as thoroughly delectable as Estelle Winwood, but we do ask, and have every right to ask, do these two give resemblance to the scene? Do they really put before us the throbbing, vital problem that we see on all sides about us in real life? Does the heroine make us feel she is really the big-hearted, intellectual, but thoroughly human girl who will sacrifice convention rather than lose her lover or see him lose himself? I think the answer must be in the negative. Obviously, the manager has played safe. He is not at all sure that the theater-going public is interested in the problem of the postponed marriage or the economic independence of married women, but he is quite sure that it, or rather she, is interested in seeing that handsome young actor, Shelley Hull, make love so divinely. Did you ever hear anyone say "I love you" more thrillingly? And the average sensual man may not take very seriously a young woman worker who wants neither to give up her professional career nor to ruin that of her lover, but he cannot fail to be interested in the woes and tribulations of so pretty and winsome a creature as Estelle Winwood. One cannot but regret that Mr. Williams did not possess the authority and determination of Mr. Bernard Shaw, who would have seen to it that Mr. Manager would have cast the play so that the characters, each and every one, lived and had their being as their creator had intended them. It seems almost ungracious to cavil at a cast which contains two such admirable characterizations as the Judge, played by the irrepressible Nat Goodwin, and the clergyman, exquisitely interpreted by that rare and dignified artist, Ernest Lawford. Yet I cannot but feel that much that is fine and true in the play, much that lifts it above the average run of plays, will inevitably escape us in the present production. The character of Helen is really a very beautiful one. It would be a mistake, notwithstanding the author's warning that she does not believe in marriage, to mistake her for one of these most unpleasant young women who parade in strange costumes and stranger attitudes in their search for self-expression, whatever that really is. She is quite a different type from the heroine of the Danish Why Marry? Karen, now on the boards. Helen is warm, affectionate, and quite old-fashioned enough to love babies and think no marriage complete without them. Moreover, she unhesitatingly yields her career as secondary to that of her husband. There is nothing at all about her of the rebellious anarchist. And the criticism that I have heard aimed at the amusing and unexpected denouement is quite unfair, for she had really never rebelled at marriage in itself, but merely marriage if it meant a burden to the man whom she loved, and whose future she did not intend to ruin. Since brother John raised the young man's salary to a very livable amount, she had certainly no objections to the marriage ceremonies being performed. And speaking of the question of salary, It seems a pity that Mr. Williams felt it incumbent upon him to play with loaded dice. I can assure him that $3,000 is not quite the usual salary of scientists, college professors, and that sort of thing. I understood that the city of New York was implied, nor, on the other hand, is it at all usual for even the most successful of practitioners to make $1,000,000. But while in some instances I longed for the superb fairness and sportsmanship of Galsworthy, nevertheless Mr. Williams has written a play which, for all its light-hearted fun, its epigram and sparkle, makes us face frankly a very real problem that not only confronts us now, but which is bound to become increasingly urgent as the full toll of the war is taken. We simply cannot go on for long permitting our youth to remain celibates, nor can we permit them to marry with a fixed determination to avoid having children. We may as well resign ourselves to seeing welcomed some of the more radical ideas concerning marriage and motherhood which only a few years ago would have been shooed off the scene. End of Characterization versus Situation by Annie Nathan Meyer. Section 6 of The Drama, a Quarterly Review. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. Excerpt of Act 1, Scene 1 of Lysistrata by Aristophanes. Lysistrata stands alone with Propylae at her back. If they were trysting for a bacchanal, a feast of Pan or Calais or Genitillus, the tambourines would block the rowdy streets, but now there's not a woman to be seen, except, ah yes, this neighbor of mine yonder. Enter Calonice. Good day, Calonice. Good day, Lysistrata. But what has vexed you so? Tell me, child, what are these black looks for? It doesn't suit you to knit your eyebrows up glumly like that. Calonice, it's more than I can bear. I am hot all over with blushes for our sex. Men say we're slippery rogues. And aren't they right? Yet summoned on the most tremendous business for deliberation, still they snuggle in bed. My dear, they'll come. It's hard for women, you know, to get away. There's so much to do. Husbands to be patted and put in good tempers. Servants to be poked out. Children washed, or soothed with lullies, or fed with mouthfuls of pap. But I tell you, here's a far more weighty object. What is this all about, dear Lysistrata, that you've called the women hither in a troop? What kind of an object is it? A tremendous thing. And long? Indeed, it may be very lengthy. Then why aren't they here? No man's connected with it. If that was the case, they'd soon come fluttering along. No, no, it concerns an object I've felt over and turned this way and that for sleepless nights. It must be fine to stand such long attention. So fine it comes to this: Greece saved by woman. By woman? Wretched thing, I'm sorry for it. Our country's fate is henceforth in our hands, to destroy the Peloponnesians root and branch. What could be nobler? Wipe out the Boeotians. Not utterly. Have mercy on the eels. But with regard to Athens, note I'm careful not to say any of these nasty things. Still, thought is free. But if the women join us from Peloponnesus and Boeotia, then hand in hand we'll rescue Greece. How could we do such a big wise deed, we women who dwell quietly adorning ourselves in a back room with gowns of lucid gold and gaudy toilets of stately silk and dainty little slippers? These are the very armaments of the rescue, these crocus gowns, this outlay of the best myrrh, slippers, cosmetics dusting beauty, and robes with rippling creases of light. Yes, but how? No man will lift a lance against another.
I'll run to have my tunic dyed crocus."
"Or take a shield."
"I'll get a stately gown."
"Or unscabbard a sword."
"Let me buy a pair of slippers."
Now tell me, are the women right to lag?
"They should have turned birds. They should have grown wings and flown."
My friend, you'll see that they are true Athenians, always too late.
Why, there's not a woman from the shoreward dames arrived, not one from Salamis. I know for certain they awoke at dawn, and got their husbands up, if not their boat sails. And I'd have staked my life the Acharnian dames would be here first, yet they haven't come either. Well, anyhow, there is Theagenes' wife. We can expect she consulted Hecate. But look, here are some at least, and more behind them. See, where are they from? From Angira they come.
Yes, they generally manage to come first.
Enter Myrrhine. Are we late, Lysistrata? What is that? Nothing to say?
I've not much to say for you, Myrrhine, dawdling on so vast an affair.
I couldn't find my girdle in the dark, but if the affair is so wonderful, tell us, what is it?
No, let us stay a little longer till the Peloponnesian girls and the girls of Boeotia are here to listen.
That's the best advice. Ah, there comes Lampito. Enter Lampito.
Welcome, Lampito, dear Spartan girl with a delightful face, washed with the rosy spring. How fresh you look in the easy stride of your sleek slenderness. Why, you could strangle a bull. End of excerpt from Act 1 of Lysistrata by Aristophanes. The Evolution of the Actor by Arthur Pollock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. The Evolution of the Actor by Arthur Pollock for the drama A Quarterly Review Collection. August 1915. If a child is told some very welcome piece of news or afforded a great or unexpected pleasure, his joyful emotions often refuse to be suppressed. He cannot resist the temptation to dance for joy. He may even turn a clumsy somersault. Thus he gives his emotions physical expression, translates them freely in terms of lively movement. That, the representation of feeling by physical action, the expression of inner being by outward seeming, is acting in its lowest and simplest form. And from some such tendency, perhaps, the act of acting sprang into being in the childhood of all peoples. The earliest phase in the conventionalization of the means for expressing such spontaneous primal emotions is the dance. The first actor, therefore, was, more properly speaking, a dancer. At the beginning, the emotions that found vent in his dancing were his own simple ones, but later, as his ability as a medium of expression grew, and gradually begot greater appreciation, he was called upon to reproduce, by the same means, the emotions of other and imaginary persons. Such, at any rate, was the origin of the acting art in Greece. The drama of the Greeks, evolving as it did from the choral dances in honor of Dionysus, demanded of its first interpreters that they be dancers only. Almost simultaneously, it is true, singing also was required of them, but dancing was the fundamental requisite. And, as has been lately emphasized, Attic theatrical art not only originated in Orchesis, but was in all its principles, even throughout the days of its greatest development, based upon the dance, for every movement and gesture of the actor was influenced by its rhythm. As the festival dancing about the altar of Dionysus became less a mere improvisation and stiffened into conventional forms, the dancers grew from enthusiastic novices into practiced performers. And as soon as special qualifications and training were demanded, chorus dancing became a profession. Today, when a particularly
capable chorus girl outshines the rest, she is given a line or two to speak, or a solo dance. Just so, by his superiority, some Greek dancer differentiated himself from his fellows and was honored by being allowed to act as leader, and in that capacity to recite, unaccompanied by the rest. Soon he ceased to be no more than a reader of the lines assigned him, began to claim as his own the experiences he recounted, and after a while was given opportunity actually to impersonate legendary heroes. Next, with the use of the masks which Thespis, a dancer, as the poets themselves were then called, is said to have introduced in the 6th century B.C., this one interpreter was enabled to enact in turn the parts of several persons. At this point the profession of the actor, as distinct from that of the chorus dancer, began. To Aeschylus is attributed the introduction of a second actor, and Sophocles soon made it possible to have 3 speaking characters on the scene at once. This number, it is generally believed, was never thereafter increased in tragedy. In comedy, too, Cratinus is credited with having set a limit of 3 upon the number of impersonators. When the action of the play demanded the presence simultaneously of more than 3 important persons, only 3 of these were given lines to speak. The remaining characters stood about in silence. Thus the performers in a Greek play were divided into 3 classes. There were the chorus men, actors, and silent impersonators, or mutes. In none of these classes were women included. Female parts were always taken by men. The duties of the members of the chorus were somewhat similar in kind to those of a modern chorus in comic opera, though a much greater degree of perfection in all the branches of their art was demanded of them. They sang, and occasionally recited, always accompanying their words with a form of dance which consisted of fluid rhythmic movements, calling the whole body into play, and eloquently expressing the emotions their own words, or those of the actor, described. As the number of actors increased and greater prominence was given to their part in the play, the importance of the chorus was appreciably lessened, until, in the new comedy, it seems to have disappeared entirely. Of the actors, as distinct from the chorus men and mutes, there were also 3 classes. The most important of the 3 actors in a play was the protagonist. The other 2 were spoken of as the deuteragonist and the tritagonist, and were hardly more than his assistants. The protagonist was the featured actor of a production. The star, to him were always allotted the fattest parts. He seems also to have been assigned a great number of female roles. Dramatic poets made their plays to fit him, just as dramatists have always built plays around great actors, and with their personalities and accomplishments in mind. And when the plays were produced, he was made the pivot of the whole performance. No star of today is given greater prominence, and probably none is more arrogant than some of the Greek protagonists grew to be. The other 2 actors were instructed to subordinate themselves to him entirely, and to do nothing that might distract attention from their colleague or excite the approbation of the crowd in their behalf. He often saw to it himself that no opportunity was given them to do so. Since so large a share in the performance was granted him, he was proportionately responsible for the success of the play. The poet's reputation was often in his hands. Hence the best protagonists were, like the stars of our own day, in great demand. Great honor was accorded them. Their victories in the dramatic contests were recorded on commemorative tablets, and they were made the pets of monarchs. Considerable, however, was exacted of the deuteragonist. His duties were important, and he had of necessity to be capable. The tritagonist, on the other hand, was called upon only when his participation was absolutely indispensable. Every part that could possibly be taken by the protagonist was given him, In fact, on many occasions he took great trouble to change masks rather than entrust either of the other two with lines that seemed to require special ability. The mutes, though essential, were unimportant. Of the Greek actor a great deal was required. First of all, of course, it was highly important that he be a man impressive in appearance and in his movements graceful and stately. The nature of the drama he interpreted demanded that he combine the talents of the singer and the dancer with those of the actor, and that he have the training and thorough education of each. Some of the more emotional passages in his parts called for a musical rendition, and the qualifications of the dancer were always called into play by his posturings, his sensuous movements, and his smooth and facile gestures. And along with this threefold demand upon him came several handicaps. The stately flowing draperies and the high and awkward boots that custom and theatrical conditions required the tragic actor to wear, though they gave him an appearance of sculptural beauty and imposing stature, prohibited quick or elaborate motion. Therefore he had to make the quiet, simple movements to which they limited him so much the more rhythmic and impressive, his poses and gestures so much the more plastic and expressive. Circumstances also made it imperative that he wear a tall, cumbersome mask covering his face and head. Though the vastness of the Greek open-air theaters would have made impotent the finer shades of facial expression, the mask prevented, was in fact a substitute for, even the most obvious. The actor could not, as can the actor of today, stand quietly about and, by delicate facial play, reveal his thoughts and emotions or show the effects the words of other characters made upon him. When his voice was silent, his sole means of making his feelings evident lay in movements of his body and limbs. Therefore, for him, the art of listening was an extremely difficult one. For the sacrifice of facial expression he had to compensate with suggestive gesticulation, and by a flexibility of voice that afforded a great variety of delicate inflections, tones, and qualities. It was only by the most assiduous and protracted training upon his part that his voice acquired this flexibility and at the same time the emotional power that the plays or poets called for. Upon his voice, above everything else, his success depended, and, as Demosthenes hinted, it was by his voice that he was judged. It must indeed have been a distinct and incisive, as well as a strong voice that could make all the nuances of expression carry throughout an audience of 20,000 or so. But it was not only obstacles presented by the physical conditions of the theater that the voice had to overcome. The many beauties of the language he declaimed made necessary perfect enunciation, precise changes of pitch, impressive pauses, and accurate placing of accents. Not only did his native tongue entail such meticulous attention to details that are so often ignored today, but his highly cultured audience would endure nothing short of perfection in this matter of articulation and accentuation. So, to meet all these requirements, the actor must have a trained intellect and absolute control of a vocal apparatus that, in itself, was an exceptional instrument. Persevering practice and continuously perfect condition were indispensable. Like the modern athlete, the Greek actor had to be always in training. By the time the Greek drama had developed to the point where one actor was used, it had lost much of the spontaneity that marked the first phase of its evolution, and had become a conventional and formal art. Thus early the young actor found himself forced to follow traditional methods in his acting. In the period in which Aeschylus produced his plays, the actor's art consisted of simple, unrealistic declamation, accompanied by slow and dignified action. A dramatic representation of the complexity of everyday life was not considered necessary, for the reason that the people depicted by the poets were not the kind of men to be met with every day upon the streets. But this conventional style, becoming irksome to the growing artist, was gradually discarded. The actor began inevitably to go to nature for his models, strove to use the actualities of the life he saw about him as the touchstone of his art. Kallipides and Nicostratus, the latter of whom possessed a style which his contemporaries considered perfect, were pioneers in the field of naturalistic acting, and led the way in this departure from the methods of the past. By their unprecedented disregard for the best traditions of Æschylus, old school, they caused great consternation in the ranks of the latter and brought about a revolution in acting methods. The period of natural acting which the efforts of these men inaugurated gave Greece her greatest actors, such men as Polus, Theodorus, Aristodemus, and Neoptolemus. It was Polus who, when his role required that he weep over an urn of human ashes, brought upon the scene, so Belasco-like was his zeal in the search for realistic touches, a vessel containing the ashes of his own dead son. Over these he wept with great sincerity and effectiveness. He was in many respects the best actor of his time. Theodorus, however, had acquired great ability in expressing strong emotions in a natural manner. By his wonderful powers of playing upon the feelings of his auditors, he is said to have moved to tears the tyrannical Alexander of Thera, who, rather than be seen weakly weeping at the simulated sufferings of Theodorus, when he had many times looked without emotion upon the pain his own cruelties had caused, fled from the theatre. These great figures in Greek dramatic history were all tragedians. Of the comic actors less is known. They were probably more fortunate than the players of tragedy in having to contend against fewer of the difficulties arising from the strictures of theatrical convention, but they appear, so far as is ascertainable, never to have succeeded in reaching so high a plane of artistic achievement. To so great a degree did the players of the period of natural acting develop their art that the contemporary dramatist was relegated to a place of secondary importance. The output of the poets seemed to have declined in quality as the actor grew in skill, until, in the latter days of Greece, the actor had to resort for dramatic material to the great plays of former poets. The staging of these old masterpieces was put into the hands of the protagonist, who thus became an actor-manager, as the first poets had been before him. With no new dramatists detracting from the attention accorded him, the actor's skill became the object of chief interest. He directed all his efforts toward the perfection of the art of acting. As a result, his powers grew overripe and went to seed. Finally, naturalism and virtuosity degenerated into mere mechanical cleverness, and trick imitations of the sounds of nature were substituted for the portrayal of character and emotion. Through the four phases discernible in the development of the histrionic art in Greece, the art of acting seems continually to revolve. Simple, unassuming recitation grows into conventional declamation. Conventionality succumbs to the demands of nature. Naturalism descends to tricks. As far as the actor's staying in the community is concerned, it could hardly have been better. He was looked upon with the veneration due a priest and the admiration accorded a great and cultured artist. Many honors and special privileges were bestowed upon him, and the remuneration he received for his labors was ample. The Roman drama, being, as it was, a backwash of the Greek, added little to the art of acting, and detracted infinitely from the esteem in which the actor himself was held. In Italy tragedy lost a great deal of its dignity, while comedy gained wide popularity, hence the greatest chance was given the comedian to develop. The Romans built their theaters, with seats for their senators, filling the orchestra, which Greek custom had reserved for the chorus. So the chorus was eliminated. Dancing, therefore, ceased to be a fundamental of the actor's art. Singing also was practically dropped, though for a time the Roman producers made a pretense of retaining it. But the actor, or histrio, as he was called, was not, until the time of Terence at any rate, handicapped by being made to wear the mask, and never wore the Greek tragic boot. Thus he was permitted greater freedom. As a result of these less artificial conditions, one phase of Greek acting was carried to a more advanced stage of development. Gesture was made an end in itself, and finally established as the independent art of pantomime, which, in the days of Rome's decline, almost crowded out all other dramatic forms. This branch of acting was, before it degenerated, a distinct addition and numbered among its performers such famous pantomimes as Bathyllus and Pylades. The Romans did not limit themselves to 3 actors, as the Greeks had done, but made use of as many as the number of characters in the play called for. Besides the actors of tragedy and comedy, and the new type of performers that the art of pantomime produced, there was a 4th class, the actors of the mimes. Women were included among the participants in these compact little comedies in verse, and had considerable effect upon their character. With the plays of Terence, women were introduced into the regular drama also. When the Greek drama was imported into Italy, Livius Andronicus, who is credited with having made the first Latin adaptations, had to resort for performers to freedmen and slaves. So, from the start, the members of the acting profession were not looked upon with favor. The actor, in fact, was an object of contempt to his countrymen, and his lot was a sorry one. Any citizen of Rome who took up acting as a profession forfeited thereby all his civic rights. If a soldier became an actor, he paid for his choice with his life. The histrion was considered a worthless person and often even classed with thieves, deserters, panders, and similarly undesirable characters. Nevertheless, when eventually the drama came to be one of the principal sources of amusement for the populace, his presence was looked upon as indispensable. But socially he was an outcast. In the matter of his more immediate connection with the play presentation, he was no less unfortunate. An error in the performance of his part upon the stage earned him a flogging from his manager, as well as very bad treatment at the hands of an audience even freer in its expressions of disapproval than the audiences in Greece. Of men so badly treated, much in the way of artistic accomplishment could not be expected. A few actors, however, overcame all these handicaps. Boscius, for instance, Rome's greatest comedian, received from Sulla the high honor of being raised from the low rank of the ordinary actor and made a senator. For him acting was also financially profitable. On occasions he is said to have received for a single performance about $150. And while in his best years he was accorded an annuity of something like $22,000. He and his contemporary, Sopus, a tragedian, represent the best that Roman actors achieved. By the time Boscius became to attain prominence, acting had reached its bombastic, exaggerated stage, but he did much to moderate the excesses which were part of the methods of his predecessors, and by his eminence and good character he was of material aid to the actor in general, since he raised the standards of the profession and inspired respect for it. With the end of the theaters in Rome, the art of acting died. Attempts were made to revive it, but they were without success. It had to be reborn, and it was not until the early Middle Ages that the process of germination began. End of The Evolution of the Actor by Arthur Pollock, from the August 1915 edition of The Drama, a Quarterly Review of Dramatic Literature. The Actor in England by Arthur Pollock, from The Drama, A Quarterly Review of Dramatic Literature, November, 1916. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. The Actor in England by Arthur Pollock. As a profession, acting has led its followers a chase by no means always a merry one. Material success in such a calling depends largely upon the popularity of the profession, and its popularity has waxed and waned throughout the ages. The modern actor, however, since his rise in the Middle Ages, has suffered, comparatively speaking, no very great reverses. In England he was set solidly upon his feet when, under the Tudors, his profession began to flourish. For a few years prior to the Restoration, and for some time after, actors were reminded emphatically that they were still looked upon as rogues and vagabonds. As such they found little favor, and the greater number of them had, perforce, to feed themselves and families with hunger, sighs, and tears. But thereafter they managed once more to land upon their feet, and practically ever since an increasingly good footing has been assured them. While the evolution of acting as a means of earning bread and butter has been a long series of ups and downs, acting as an art has evolved in a circle from simplicity to simplicity. The various phases of its change lie between the simplicity which is meager and ingenuous and a simplicity infinitely more subtle, pregnant with suggestion, and born of the wisdom of experience. This progress from the artless, ineffective efforts of the novice to the simple, seemingly effortless effects of the artist is illustrated by the development of acting in England from the time of the first futile amateurs to the present day. The mutations in this evolution have been not unlike those that marked the growth of the actor's art in Greece. Acting started in the Middle Ages as unpretentious pantomime and naive recitation. By degrees, as the actor realized the possibilities latent in voice and physique, his delivery grew more studied until eventually it became self-consciously declamatory. The bubble of bombast was then pricked by the first actors who saw the advantage of employing art to appear natural. By their success they soon were tempted into an excess of artifice, and the only recourse for their successors was a return to a simplicity which, though infinitely more sophisticated, approximated that of the novice. By the time English amateurs had gained a degree of proficiency sufficient to warrant their adopting acting as a profession, and their ranks had been augmented by clownish professional comedians of the type of Richard Tarleton and Will Kemp, playwrights had become ambitious in striving for effects, and accomplished in clothing them with flamboyant and sonorous phrases. With such stilted plays as Gorboduc and Gambyses began the period of turgid rhetoric and stately bombast, and those spectators who later went to see Kit Marlowe's Tamburlaine were greeted by the author's assurance that they would hear the actors threatening the world with high astounding terms. Equally high and astounding must have been the acting. Gayton, writing in 1654, recorded that the poets of the Fortune and Red Bull had always a mouth measure for their actors, who were terrible tear-throats, and made their lines proportionable to their compasses, which were sesquipedales, a foot and a half. For the actor it was an age of elocution and swift action. The theater that had by this time been evolved fostered this elaborateness of language and free and easy movement. The performers, as they strode about on their platform stage, were fairly in the midst of their responsive audience. In such a theater there was an atmosphere not only of intimacy but of familiarity. The spectators all were eager to welcome with delight the great feast of language prepared for them, whether it were a dissertation on the quality of mercy or a fanciful description of the many kinds of melancholy popular among the Elizabethan gallants, and the player was equally anxious to demonstrate his ability to drop trippingly from the tongue a mint of phrases. Of the actors of that day little is known, but it is evident that the sturdy Eichard Burbage and the ebullient Edward Alleyn facile of tongue and agile, were the most prominent men on the boards, and they were, no doubt, models of this exuberant style of acting. Alain was perhaps the more boisterous and the less subtle of the two, for he had been trained in the most turbulent parts in the plays of Kyd and Marlowe. There are indications that Burbage was of a somewhat different type. Even at so early a stage in the history of English acting, signs were not wanting of a tendency to go back to nature. Burbage seems to have represented that tendency. He had gained his experience in the same company as Shakespeare, his associate, and Shakespeare, if we are willing to let Hamlet's words bear weight with us, was dissatisfied with the prevailing histrionic methods and ambitious to make the acting of his time less unlike the natural actions of normal persons. These actors had the pleasant privilege of seeing the profession they followed well established, and though they and their fellow performers were not yet considered any too respectable, they could not well have been more popular. They were much mourned when they died, and well remunerated while they lived. Some of them grew rich enough to be reviled by the Puritans for their lavish display of magnificence. It was Edward Alleyn, the most affluent of them all, who, with parts of his wealth, founded Dulwich College. The best of the players, those upon whom fell most of the work of producing the plays, were shareholders in the company to which they belonged, and hence received, in addition to their salaries, a portion of the profits. The inferior members of each troupe, however, were paid only a weekly wage. It was much the same managerial system that Molière later introduced in France and passed on to the Comédie Française. When the theaters were closed in 1642, all actors were classed once more as undesirables. Few of the old and experienced actors were left when, in 1660, performances were again permitted. Young and untrained men had to be depended upon to take their places. And now, for the first time in England, women found their way to the stage to fill, thenceforth, most of the female roles, as for some time they had been doing in France and Italy. Despite the forced infusion of new blood, many of the old traditions seem somehow to have been handed down, and the declamatory style, now lacking much of the old spontaneity and grown more conventional, still endured. Thomas Betterton, who quickly rose above his contemporaries, kept alive many of the old methods. He had been tutored by D'Avenant, who was familiar with the Shakespearean conception of what acting ought to be. With his dignified, somewhat ponderous declamation, Betterton was the greatest figure on the stage of the period, and when he died in 1710 the Elizabethan style lost its last great exponent. He was perhaps the first English actor to work out definite theories of acting, one of the first, at least, to put his theories in such a form that they could be handed down for the benefit of future generations. And with his talents as an actor, he combined a knowledge of stagecraft, which he supplemented by a study of French methods in Paris. After the death of Betterton, the actor began to go to nature for his inspiration. As Kallipodes and Nicostratus had done centuries before in Greece, so Doggett and Macklin did now in England. Comedy was the first to feel the effects of this new attitude of the actor. In both comedy and tragedy, characterization had grown to lack differentiation, had become stereotyped. Most comic characters were portrayed by clownish, low comedy methods and impersonated by actors who used the same uninspired line of business in part after part. Thomas Doggett, a comedian, broke away from these narrow prescribed limits. He had been looking about him at life and his fellow men, and it struck him that it would be a good thing for his fame, and for the drama too, if he were to give minutely characterized and naturalistic representations on the stage of the particular types of character called for by the roles assigned him. By putting his idea into effect, he changed the whole conception of how comic characters should be played, and enlarged the horizon of the comic actor. This new method of character acting was taken up by Colley Gibber and other actors of the day. Gibber, as an actor, was rather limited in range, but his success was considerable nevertheless. The modern actor owes him much. By virtue of the fact that he was a man of good family, thorough education, and sound business instincts, his presence on the stage reflected credit upon his profession and served indirectly to improve the position of its members both socially and financially. In 1741 Charles Macklin did for tragedy what Doggett and his imitators had done for comedy. His realistic characterization of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice was revolutionary. Instead of Shylock played in a spirit of broad farce, as tradition then demanded, he portrayed a Jew whose character and actions were those of a strong, vengeful, virile human being. His performance was a shock to the old school's admirers and an inspiration to the younger actors who were in a position to oppose the old and eager to adopt the new. This trend toward truer character interpretation David Garrick undertook to carry on. The style Doggett and Macklin had devised and courageously introduced, he perfected. His acting was so strangely lifelike, so simple and human, that Churchill was prompted to say that one could not be pleased with nature without appreciating Garrick. And Goldsmith paid a tribute to his art when he wrote that it was only off the stage that Garrick acted. Those actors whose methods had been molded by tradition grudgingly made way for him. Though traces of the grand style were still evident years after in the work of John Kemble and his sister Mrs. Siddons, Garrick very effectually ended the sway of the monotonous, colorless, declamatory delivery. Before his death in 1779 he had done more for acting than any other man of the theater has ever done. In his own work he developed to a great degree the ability to make his silence eloquent by betraying a proper interest in what the other characters were saying and doing while he himself had no lines to speak. By insisting that the other members of his company be equally sedulous in their attempts to acquire the art of listening, and by setting both them and the actors of rival companies so good an example, he no doubt had an effect upon the group acting of his time. It is a fact, at any rate, that while he was prominent upon the stage, great progress was made toward the perfection of ensemble acting. Up to Garrick's day a certain class of spectators had retained the privilege of sitting, in all their arrogance, upon the stage. Garrick dislodged them, and thereby did his fellows a considerable service. With his numerous innovations he cleared away much of the old stultifying convention and opened new and fertile fields for progress. Countless present-day traditions, especially those that have to do with the interpretation of Shakespeare, are traceable to him. His talent, wealth, popularity, and wide acquaintance among the most cultured and influential people of his day increased respect for the actor's calling. Garrick has made a player a higher character, said Johnson. Not long after this salutary revision of the actor's methods, the art of playmaking began to decline. After the appearance of She Stoops to Conquer and The School for Scandal, playwrights ceased almost entirely to progress, stopped striving to create, and were satisfied to be imitators. In the years that followed, they became obsessed with a desire to emulate Shakespeare, and slavishly wrote feeble dramas with his plays as models. Later they fell to aping the playwrights then popular in France, and adapting their well-made dramas. As a result, the plays of the time were flimsy and artificial. Histrionic material being thus very nearly negligible, the actor's methods now received undue emphasis and attention. By playing in the contemporary theatrical concoctions and performing over and over again the dramas of the past, the player developed his powers as a character actor and portrayer of emotion to a degree almost unprecedented. And since the aim of the authors who devised plays for him was to make them theatrically effective rather than true to life, he, in presenting their works, was tempted to be equally meretricious. Nature was neglected, technique approached very close to perfection. It was a time of little matter, and much art. So while the art of drama conceived as interpretive of life, marked time, the talents of the actor grew a bit overripe and gave evidence of a tendency to go to seed, just as had been the case at a similar stage in the development of Greek acting. Toward the end of the 19th century, new theatrical evils began to have their effect upon the art of acting. The advent of the strictly commercial manager, the exaltation of the star, the growth of the long run system, and the disappearance of the stock company, all made the actor's proper development more difficult, and they continued still to do so. During the interval between Sheridan and the men who laid the foundation of the modern English realistic drama, actors became virtuosi and completely outshone the dramatists. It was this epoch that produced such notable players as Kemble and Mrs. Siddons, the Keans, Macready, and Irving. They were figures of great importance in the growth of the art of presenting plays. They were great actors. But their greatness was of a kind that the drama of today does not demand. When the play began again to be the thing with which to attract the public, a different style of acting was made necessary. Robertson's teacup and saucer drama and the school of realists it started, combined with the influence of Ibsen and his social drama, produced a type of play in which acting that is primarily a display of vocal and physical flexibility and emotional pyrotechnics would seem incongruous. Conditions of play presentation were also changing. The platform stage had shrunk to the so-called apron, which in turn gave place to the picture frame proscenium, thus isolating the actor from his audience. Improved methods of lighting made exaggerated gestures and grimaces unnecessary. At the same time, scenery had evolved to a point where interiors might be shown and made to take on the appearance of actual rooms, carefully and completely furnished and suitably illuminated. Under such conditions the acting that had long been looked upon as natural was seen to have less real relation to nature than had once been supposed. The actor had reached his goal, and not content with that, had pushed on until he overreached it. New requirements and new conceptions of what his aim ought to be forced him to change his methods and approach a new goal by a different road. So we have the acting of the present, for the most part less technically perfect than was the acting in the period from Kemble to Irving, less striking, having less of splendor in it. But we like to think that it is deeper and truer, more natural than natural acting has ever been. At any rate, it is the acting that modern conditions and contemporary drama and new ideals make necessary and desirable. Edmund Kean, with his terrible flashes of fury, would hardly feel at home in a drama like The Weavers. Among the Irish players, Henry Irving, to whom the English stage and the English actor are so greatly indebted, would find no place to fit him. Partridge, who could see nothing worthy in Garrick's Hamlet, would be extremely bored by the acting of our time. To him our efforts to reveal people deporting themselves in drawing rooms or tenement houses as people who are used to having drawing rooms or living in tenement houses would not be acting at all. And he would not understand Mr. Yeats when he says, "No singer of my works must ever cease to be a man and become an instrument." Nor would the actor of what we now call the palmy days have wished to obey this mandate, for in doing so he would have been defeating his own ends. The acting of Kean and Irving and the men of the period they represent was ornate. The aim of the modern actor is truth unadorned. In its evolution, acting has completed the circle. It has passed through the stage of excessive artifice and arrived once more at simplicity. End of The Actor in England by Arthur Pollock. Act 1, Scene 2 of The Straw by Eugene O'Neill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes.
The reception room of the infirmary, a large, high-ceilinged room painted white, with oiled hardwood floor. In the left wall, forward, a row of 4 windows. Farther back, the main entrance from the drive, and another window. In the rear wall left, a glass partition looking out on the sleeping porch. A row of white beds, with the faces of patients barely peeping out from under piles of heavy bedclothes, can be seen. To the right of this partition, a bookcase, and a door leading to the hall past the patients' rooms. Farther right, another door opening on the examining room. In the right wall, rear, a door to the office. Farther forward, a row of windows. In front of the windows, a long dining table with chairs. On the left of the table, towards the center of the room, a chimney with 2 open fireplaces, facing left and right. Several wicker armchairs are placed around the fireplace on the left, in which a cheerful wood fire is crackling. To the left of center, a round reading and writing table with a green-shaded electric lamp. Other electric lights are in brackets around the walls. Easy chairs stand near the table, which is stacked with magazines. Rocking chairs are placed here and there about the room, near the windows, etc. A gramophone stands near the left wall, forward. It is nearing 8 o'clock of a cold evening about a week later. At the rise of the curtain, Stephen Murray is discovered sitting in a chair in front of the fireplace, left. Murray is 30 years old, a tall, slender, rather unusual looking fellow with a pale face, sunken under high cheekbones, lined about the eyes and mouth, jaded and worn for one still so young. His intelligent, large hazel eyes have a tired, dispirited expression in repose, but can quicken instantly with a concealed mechanism of mocking, careless humor whenever his inner privacy is threatened. His large mouth aids this process of protection by a quick change from its set apathy to a cheerful grin of cynical good nature. He gives off the impression of being somehow dissatisfied with himself, but not yet embittered enough by it to take it out on others. His manner, as revealed by his speech, nervous, inquisitive, alert, seems more an acquired quality than any part of his real nature. He stoops a trifle, giving him a slightly round-shouldered appearance. He is dressed in a shabby dark suit, baggy at the knees. He is staring into the fire, dreaming, an open book lying unheeded on the arm of his chair. The gramophone is whining out the last strains of Dvorak's Humoresque. In the doorway to the office, Miss Gilpin stands talking to Miss Howard. The former is a slight, middle-aged woman with black hair and a strong, intelligent face, its expression of resolute efficiency softened and made kindly by her warm, sympathetic gray eyes. Miss Howard is tall, slender, and blonde, decidedly pretty, and provokingly conscious of it, yet with a certain air of seriousness underlying her apparent frivolity. She is 20 years old. The elder woman is dressed in the all-white of a full-fledged nurse. Miss Howard wears the gray-blue uniform of one still in training. The record finishes. Murray sighs with relief, but makes no move to get up and stop the grinding needle. Miss Howard hurries across to the machine. Miss Gilpin goes back into the office. Miss Howard takes off the record, glancing at Murray with amused vexation. "It's a wonder you wouldn't stop this machine grinding itself to bits, Mr. Murray." Murray with a smile. "I was hoping the darn thing would bust." Miss Howard sniffs. Murray grins at her teasingly. "It keeps you from talking to me. That's the real music." Miss Howard comes over to his chair, laughing. "It's easy to see you've got Irish in you. Do you know what I think? I think you're a natural born kidder. All newspaper reporters are like that, I've heard." "You wrong me terribly." Then frowning. "And it isn't charitable to remind me of my job. I hope to forget all about it up here." Miss Howard, surprised. "I think it's great to be able to write. I wish I could. You ought to be proud of it." "I'm not. You can't call it writing. Not what I did. Small town stuff. But I wanted to ask you something.
Do you know when I'm to be moved away to the huts? In a few days, I guess. Don't be impatient. Murray grunts and moves nervously on his chair. What's the matter? Don't you like us here at the sanatorium? Murray, smiling. Oh, you, yes. Then seriously, I don't care for the atmosphere, though. He waves his hand towards the partition looking out on the porch. All those people in bed out there on the porch seem so sick. It's depressing. I can't do anything for them, and it makes me feel so helpless. Well, it's the rules, you know. All the patients have to come here first until Dr. Stanton finds out whether they're well enough to be sent out to the huts and cottages. And remember, you're a patient, just like the ones in bed out there, even if you are up and about. I know it, but I don't feel as I were really sick like them. None of them do, either. Murray, after a moment's reflection, cynically. Yes, I suppose it's that pipe dream that keeps us all going, eh? Well, you ought to be thankful. You're very lucky, if you knew it. Shall I tell you a secret? I've seen your chart, and you've no cause to worry. Dr. Stanton joked about it. He said you were too uninteresting. There was so little the matter with you. Murray, pleased, but pretending indifference. Humph! He's original in that opinion. I know it's hard, your being the only one up the week since you've been here, with no one to talk to, but there's another patient due today. Maybe she'll be well enough to be around with you, with a quick glance at her wristwatch. She can't be coming unless she got in on the last train. It's a she, eh? Yes. Young? 18, I believe. Seeing his grin with faint pique. I suppose you'll be asking if she's pretty next. Oh, you men are all alike, sick or well. Her name is Carmody. That's the only other thing I know. So there. Carmody. Oh, you don't know her. She's from another part of the state from your town. Miss Gilpin, appearing in the office doorway. Miss Howard? Yes, Miss Gilpin. In an aside to Murray as she leaves him. It's time for those horrid diets. End of a scene from Act 1, Scene 2 of The Straw by Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill, Master of Naturalism by Oliver M. Sayler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by BellonaTimes. Eugene O'Neill, Master of Naturalism by Oliver M. Sayler for The Drama, a quarterly magazine collection. This is from The Drama, Volume 11, 1920 to 1921. Mr. Eugene O'Neill has written a new two-act play, Different. The Provincetown Players have presented it as their second bill of the season. These are simple, undraped facts, the adornment of which, in the colors they seem to demand on observation of the play, might appear extravagant, were it not for the fact that Mr. O'Neill's earlier works, Beyond the Horizon and The Emperor Jones, have been clothed by general agreement with the habiliments of literary idols. Perhaps it is too soon to insist that Different is the greatest play which Mr. O'Neill has yet composed, that it is the finest piece of dramatic naturalism achieved by an American playwright, if not by anyone employing the English language, although the chances are so strongly in favor of that verdict that there is temptation to waive further deliberation and make full confession. It is not too soon, however, to admit that the new play is worthy of the tradition which its author has established and an interesting and original development of that tradition. Like most of his etudes, the denouement of Different is tragic. Like most of them, too, although its locale is on dry land, it deals with the ways of seafaring men and home-biding women. The sweep of the waves is undercurrent to the lives and the story it enfolds. Captain Caleb Williams has returned from a whaling voyage to wed Emma Crosby. Emma is resolved on conceiving him as different from other men, herself as different from the girls she knows, and their impending life together as different from ordinary wedlock. Her conception of what she means by different is vague, and of the emotions rather than of the head, although Caleb is above the average as sailors go. And so, when on the eve of their marriage she hears how he had yielded to the temptation of a native girl on a South Sea island, she astonishes him and her family and friends by rejecting him. "I don't love him what he is now," she says. "I loved what I thought he was." 30 years pass. It is spring, 1920. Caleb has remained true to his vow to wed no one else. Emma has held to her obstinate decision. Caleb's scapegrace nephew, Benny Rogers, back from overseas but still in khaki, has aroused in Emma a false and unnatural second youth in the hope of wheedling money out of her. To blackmail his uncle, he proposes marriage to her, and the tragic conclusion of this bitterly disillusioning situation follows swiftly and surely. Two aspects the new play possesses in common with its predecessors: the inherent nature of the tragic motive and the natural quality of the language by which the characters express themselves. Just as in Beyond the Horizon, the theme of Different is the tragedy of missed opportunities. Inevitable and fatal consequences follow in the wake of the mistaken choice in the one play as in the other. It does not temper the denouement to realize that the characters had it in their power to avert the catastrophe if they had been other than they were. Rather, it sharpens the denouement and makes it all the more poignant. Here is no dependence on extraneous fate or the Greek gods. We see men and women fashion their own fate and reap the harvest they have sown. The tragedy consists in the fact that they do not realize what they are sowing until the harvest is upon them. Like all his previous plays, too, Different has that lyric quality of speech which demands utterance to achieve its full effect. No one writing for the theater to day knows so well as Mr. O'Neill how to make a character express its inner self in the mere audible flow of language. Different rises above its predecessors in the articulation of its parts, in the economy and fluency of its narrative elements. Mr. O'Neill has heeded the criticisms which were leveled at Beyond the Horizon, and has knitted the story together this time so that it seems more credible and inexorable. He has done this, too, under the handicap of a gap of 30 years between the two acts of the play. Instead of permitting that gap, however, to divide the play into two independent parts, he has capitalized it and has made it serve his ends dynamically. There is only one new character in the second act, the ne'er-do-well Benny, logical son of the father whom the first act disclosed. The room is the same, altered only at the will of Emma under the new impulses which came as harvest to the life and emotions she had chosen to cultivate. The 30 years seem but as a day, and yet the mere conception of 30 years seeming as a day lengthens them as no other device could do. The past and the present are very near to each other, and yet they are very far apart, a thought which heightens the tragedy the more. More than ever before, unless it be in certain scenes of The Emperor Jones, Mr. O'Neill has revealed the inmost depths of his characters to his audience, has let them reveal themselves without his intruding aid. Of all the dramatic writers of the realistic and naturalistic schools, there is no one who keeps more aloof than he. There is nothing of the propagandist in him. His figures speak for themselves, expose their own personalities. They are never a mouthpiece for the author or for any theory in which he may believe. Indifferent, This soft revelation of the characters becomes so intimate at times that the spectator is distinctly impressed with the discomfort and embarrassment of being present as an eavesdropper at a private and confidential meeting. Surely the things these people are saying are not meant for other ears. They would not speak so if they dreamed anyone were listening. Such an impression is the triumph of naturalism. It may, if pushed too far, become the reductio absurdum of realism and naturalism as methods of artistic expression. But Mr. O'Neill does not go too far. His taste and his instinct halt him in time, but not before he has ruffled the complacency of those whose failings lay them open to the critical astringency of these frank human portraits. There is something in Mr. O'Neill at this point which allies him closely with Maxim Gorky at his best, with the finest scenes in the lower depths, for instance, where men and women lose the guise of types and stand forth as naked and pitifully struggling souls. Interpretation which the Provincetown players provided for Different is not all that such a play deserves, but it is astonishingly good for semi-amateurs. The smug respectability of the small town parlor of the 1890s is vividly conveyed. The leading roles are all acted with a fine comprehension of the author's purpose. If not always with a full realization of that purpose, James Light and Mary Blair are the two young people who grow old waiting, and their simplicity and sincerity carry them over many difficulties. The most remarkable individual performance, though, is that of Charles Ellis as the delinquent Benny, a characterization unsurpassed in its genre since the Henry Clegg of Dudley Diggs in St. John Ervine's play At the Theatre Guild. Mr. Ellis's work stamps him as one of the discoveries among the younger generation of actors. With The Emperor Jones, recently installed in an uptown theater for the benefit of a wider public, it is perhaps pertinent to consider Different in the familiar light of its predecessor. Two plays could hardly be more dissimilar in general manner. The swan song of the Pullman porter on his isle in the Caribbees is imaginative drama, romance at its zenith. Different? Well, it is all that its name implies, for the naturalistic drama is at the other pole from the imaginative. This is not the place to consider the comparative merits of the two forms. It is sufficient simply to record the belief that the superiority of Mr. O'Neill's latest play consists in its fuller realization of the possibilities of its genre. By the production of three major works in a single 12-month, Eugene O'Neill has set a record up to which it may be hard for him to live. He has assumed a responsibility and an obligation which would have embarrassed such deliberate playwrights as Ibsen and Chekhov. Only Synge with In the Shadow of the Glent Riders of the Sea and The Well of the Saints to his credit for the years 1902-3 is a comparable case. The Provincetown players, too, have, with Mr. O'Neill's aid, established a place which they may find difficult to maintain, but he and they are Americans, and it is not safe to predict limits where pace is concerned. End of Eugene O'Neill, Master of Naturalism, by Oliver M. Saylor.